Okay, good evening, everyone. Am I audible? Please confirm. Good. So, still some members are missing. 45 members are still there. Uh, Anyhow, we have started the recording, so we should start the session. I hope that everyone got the assignment for yesterday's session. Please confirm. How many of you have gone through those assignments? Anyone who has gone through the assignment properly? Now that assignment is very simple. You have to just use a Spring Boot and some REST API you need to create. And then after you need to add this Spring security concept as well. The same assignment gradually you are going to improve. That means after the today's completion of that today's session, you will be able to implement the authorization part, role-based authentication as well. So I recommend that everyone to be much more comfortable in the Spring security and the Spring Boot part. You should attempt that assignments and complete those assignments properly. Don't miss that assignment. This type of assignments only you are going to get that in a real-time industry. So if you really like the coding and if you really just interested to learn that Spring Boot and Spring security in much more detail, please complete that assignment. And then if you have the time, you can do some R&D as well. How you can enhance your assignment to the next level, how you can optimize your code. So lots of research you can do there. You have the chat GPT, you can paste that code in your chat GPT, check out that whether this code will be further optimized or not, what are the bugs and what are the other areas where you can improve your code as well. So it's up to your wish how you are going to take those assignments and how you are completing them. Okay, anyhow, let's continue our further discussion of Spring Security. So Spring Security last class we have discussed, and we have just applied some, we have developed some application by using, due to Spring Security 3, sir, ChatGPT is useless. Yes, Swapnil, we know that. Actually, after that Spring Security latest, if you just try to get that any update from the ChatGPT, in fact, from Stack Overflow also, you won't get any proper support. That's what it was. As far as my story, what is there, I have worked with the older version of Spring Security as well, and I have created some kind of notes for the previous batches. But again, from Spring Security 6.1 version onwards, lots of syntaxes got changed. Then again, I have to just refactor my notes and just modify those notes again and again. But while just refactoring those notes and modifying those notes and to be compatible with the latest version, I tried to find out some solution in the Google Chat GPT, but I didn't get any kind of solution. So I have no other choice. I have to reach out to the official documentation. From there, I just collect some information and then I applied in our examples. But you need not worry, because we are going to work on our latest version of Spring Security. So everything you are going to learn in very deep and very easier manner. Okay. So last class we have created some application, and in that application, what we did, let me just go through that. First of all, you need to throw a dependency of Spring Security, and then after we have used what first example without giving the username and password manually, and that time the password was generated on the console. Next time we had given the password on a application.properties file, username and password, the credentials, and using that we have authenticated. We have seen that how much important role of the JSession ID maintained there. Maintain that authenticated user so that it will not ask you again and again the username and password. And then after we have seen that last class itself, some basic architecture flow of the Spring Security. Lots of time we just spend our time on a theoretical part. That means the basic flow of the Spring Security. What is the role of authentication object, authentication manager, authentication provider? Some of you may not understand some concept in thoroughly, but don't worry, even some lags are there in yesterday's session. Today, while doing some examples, you will get very much clarity on that concept. Now, the next thing after that, what we did in last example, we after completion of our what the basic flow and the architecture of Spring Security, we develop another application where we have just configured our Spring Security configuration. And what we did, we have discussed about that. What is the meaning of this method and this security filter chain object? This bean you need to register in order to customize your security configuration. And we have seen that how to whitelist certain APIs. इस APIs के लिए हमारा security हमें enforce नहीं करेगा authentication के लिए, and how other requests will be authenticated. That means other than these requests, you have to use what you need to pass that. You have to be authenticated first. We discussed some little bit idea. We took that what is a CSRF, but we didn't get that what proper information about that. But temporarily, we just disable this CSRF. And why? Because like that, by default, put and post requests are not allowed by the Spring Security because of CSRF attack. So for the CSRF related security, we just disable that temporarily basis. But in real time, we don't disable the CSRF as it is, because obviously if it is protected, that means if it is there mentioned that in a Spring Security, so they have some reason why they have already they are not allowing the post and put request. So we are going to see that in a tomorrow's session in much more detail about the CSRF configuration. And we have again discussed that what is the meaning of this form login and HTTP basics. So lots of stories are also behind this. If you want to configure your own form page, then also you can configure this form login page and this HTTP basic for basic authentication. And once you call this http.build, you are going to get this Spring security filter chain object, which is going to register on a Spring container. Okay. Then after last class, we discussed about that two options to register multiple user. How to register the multiple user? In that case, we have used this class. We need to register this bean inside our Spring container. So I have written one method, user details. The method name could be anything, but the return type in-memory user detail manager. Sir, what is this in-memory user detail manager? If you recall this diagram is, I told that it's a super important diagram. So whenever any user will pass that username and password, the credential, then what will happen? Yeah. What will happen? Username password will be supplied. So some security chain or some, you can say that Spring Security, they will extract your username and password and compose authentication object. मतलब यूजर नेम पासवर्ड को लेके कुछ हमारे पास फिल्टर है, जैसे कि बेसिक ऑथेंटिकेशन फिल्टर है, यूजर नेम पासवर्ड ऑथेंटिकेशन फिल्टर है. इनका काम क्या है कि इन यूजर नेम पासवर्ड को निकाल के ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट बनाना, और फिर ये फिल्टर पास किसे कॉल करता है, यूज करता है बाय यूजिंग द ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर. ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर का ये दिस इज ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर. लास्ट क्लास वी डिस्कस्ड अबाउट दैट ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर is an interface. Can you tell me that? What is the implementation class name? The implementation class name of this authentication manager is? Anyone? That is provider manager. Provider manager is a class which implements this authentication manager. और इसके अंदर एक मेथड होता है. मेथड का नाम क्या होता है? Authenticate. Oh, sorry, authentication. Authenticate. And it will take authentication object once again. Like this. So this method is got implemented inside this provider manager class. So the filter basically will compose this authentication object. ये filter हमारे user and password को निकाल के ये authentication object compose करेगा. Now this authentication basically it is also an interface. Can you tell me that? What is the implementation class name of this interface? इसके implementation class का नाम कोई बताओ? Write down in your chat box. Last class we have discussed that. That is what? Username, password, token, right? Authentication token. Username, password, authentication. It is the implementation class. मतलब ये एक इंटरफेस है और ये इसका implementation class है, right? सो बेसिकली जब ये सिक्योरिटी फिल्टर्स हमारे जो हैं यूजर नेम पासवर्ड को एक्सट्रैक्ट करते हैं, तो ये इस क्लास का ऑब्जेक्ट बनाते हैं। इस क्लास का ऑब्जेक्ट मतलब ये आपके ऑथेंटिकेशन का ऑब्जेक्ट बन गया, क्योंकि ये इसका इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लास है। इंटरफेस का हम ऑब्जेक्ट नहीं बनाते, तो इसका ऑब्जेक्ट बन जाता है बाय सप्लाइंग द यूजर नेम एंड पासवर्ड। और ये ऑब्जेक्ट अब कहाँ पास हो जाएगा, आपके ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर के ऑथेंटिकेट मेथड को डेलीगेट हो जाएगा बाय यूजिंग दिस हियर। दैट मींस दिस ऑब्जेक्ट विल बी सप्लाइड टू हियर। इस ऑब्जेक्ट में भी है क्या, सिर्फ यूजर नेम एंड पासवर्ड, and if you have the authorities role, those also will be there, so that will be encapsulated over here. Now this authenticate method will going to talk, ये provider manager का authenticate method है, this will gonna talk to which one, it will talk with authentication manager। किससे talk करता है, authentication provider से, that means it will going to talk to the authentication provider here। इस ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर के अंदर भी इसी तरह का एक और मेथड हमारे पास है, दैट मींस सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ मेथड इज आल्सो देयर, similar kind of method is also there, so it will have the same authenticate method is there, that means it will have, it will call the, basically it will check, we can have multiple authentication providers, हमारे पास बहुत सारे authentication provider हो सकते हैं, लेकिन स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी जो यूज करता है बाय डिफॉल्ट उसका नाम है डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर। ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर एक इंटरफेस है और ये इसकी कुछ इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लासेस है, जैसे कि डाओ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर, कस्टम ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर हम खुद से भी बना सकते हैं, एलडैप ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर, तो कई सारे ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर हमारे पास हो सकते हैं, लेकिन स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी जो डिफॉल्ट यूज करता है वो डाओ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर को यूज करता है। मेक सेंस? अभी थोड़ी देर में हम खुद भी अपना एक ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर हम यूज करेंगे, हम वी कैन राइट आवर कस्टम ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर एज वेल। सो इस ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर इंटरफेस के अंदर भी इसी तरह की एक और मेथड है हमारे पास, सो इट विल टॉक विद ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर and this is the default one, DAO authentication provider. And it will call a method. Which method? That is, what is the difference between the above 3 and below 3 in the diagram? We will discuss, we will just hold on, everything we are going to discuss. So इसके अंदर भी एक authenticate method है हमारे पास है, which will gonna return you authentication object। ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट, ये मेथड इसी तरह का मेथड है हमारे पास, मतलब सेम टाइप का मेथड, मेथड नेम इज ऑथेंटिकेट, पैरामीटर इज ऑथेंटिकेशन, रिटर्न टाइप इज ऑथेंटिकेशन। It is also there in the authentication manager, it is also there in the authentication provider. So authentication manager का authenticate method call करेगा authenticate method of authentication provider by passing its authentication object over here like this. Now this authenticate method basically will do that your exact authentication। इसका काम क्या होगा कि डेटाबेस से यूजर के डिटेल को फेच करना और यूजर ने जो पासवर्ड दिया है जो इसके अंदर पड़ा हुआ है उस पासवर्ड से मैच करना, कुछ और क्राइटेरिया को चेक करना कि ऑथेंटिकेशन है या नहीं, और हमारे ऑथेंटिकेशन को सक्सेस बना लेना, मतलब इस ऑथेंटिकेशन का ऑब्जेक्ट बनाना और इस ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट को सिक्योरिटी कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर रख देना, put that in a security context। Make sense? So that authenticate method will do all those stuff for you। It will do what? Let me just repeat once again। Basically it will, because here your basic username password is encapsulated, that username password will come over here in this authenticate method। Now this authenticate method will perform, it will perform actual authentication by comparing the password of this authentication और जो यूजर का पासवर्ड डेटाबेस के अंदर या फिर कहीं पे भी स्टोर किया हुआ है उसे मैच करना और उसके ऑथेंटिकेशन को लाइक not JSON ID, password, just matching the password and principal object, composing the principal object and putting that object in this authentication, that means return that authentication object। So this authentication object will have just username and password, but this authentication object will have the principal। Principal is authenticated object। लेकिन अगर password match नहीं हुआ या authentication fail हो गया, that time it will throw an exception, that is bad credential or authentication fail exception with 401 unauthenticated error। Make sense? Please confirm। कूल। अब ये ऑथेंटिकेशन जो प्रोवाइडर हमारा है, जैसे डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर, इसके अंदर हम चाहें तो अपने सारे ऑथेंटिकेशन के लॉजिक हम खुद से लिख सकते हैं, लेकिन उस काम को आसान बनाने के लिए बेसिकली कुछ क्लासेस है हमारे पास, जैसे कि कुछ सर्विस क्लासेस है, यूजर डिटेल सर्विस, देयर इज वन इंटरफेस। तो आप इस इंटरफेस का भी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन दिया हुआ है, जैसे कि एक क्लास हम ऑलरेडी यूज कर चुके हैं, इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल सर्विस। Just now we have used that in the previous example. Here it is, in memory user detail service. So basically this class is nothing but your what? Since it is an implementation, you can say it is a user detail service. User detail service एक इंटरफेस है और ये सारे इसके इम्प्लीमेंटेशन क्लास है। जैसे कि आपका इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल सर्विस हो गया, हम खुद से अपना यूजर डिटेल सर्विस बना सकते हैं, एंड राइट नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू डू दैट। There is a JDBC user detail service is there. So different user detail services. So some of the already implemented classes are there, and we can write our custom implementation also of this interface. क्यों सर, क्यों करना पड़ेगा इसे इम्प्लीमेंट? क्योंकि जब ये ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर डेटाबेस से डेटा को निकालेगा, यूजर के डिटेल्स को, इसे ऑथेंटिकेट करने के लिए चाहिए क्या? यूजर नेम पासवर्ड तो मिल चुका है ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट के अंदर, अब ये मैच करेगा हमारे यूजर डिटेल के पासवर्ड से, और मतलब परफॉर्म द ऑथेंटिकेशन लॉजिक, इट नीड्स योर यूजर डिटेल्स. So either you can fetch the user detail from the database here itself, or you can take the help of this interface, right? So this interface basically DAO authentication provider, which will take the help of this interface, and by default this class just now we have used that in memory user detail service. So DAO authentication provider के लिए चाहिए ये वाली बीन, जो हम ये बीन कॉन्फ़िगर कर चुके हैं, राइट? और ये बीन हमारा कर क्या रहा है? दिस बीन इज हैविंग अ पर्टिकुलर मेथड. कौन सा मेथड होगा? बेसिकली नॉट अ मेथड, बेसिकली this all the implementation class, it will return the user details. These all classes return this user details, चाहे वो in memory user details हो, चाहे वो custom user details हम लिखें, अभी हम थोड़ी देर में लिखेंगे तो और सारी चीजें क्लियर हो जाएगी, चाहे वो JDBC user details है, सब के सब ये user details हमें रिटर्न करेंगे. तो ये यूजर डिटेल्स यहाँ पे आएगा. इस यूजर डिटेल्स में यूजर की सारी इंफॉर्मेशन होगी. कौन सी इंफॉर्मेशन? कि उसका यूजर नेम क्या है, पासवर्ड क्या है, उसका सेशन एक्टिव है, फेल है, उसकी अथॉरिटीज क्या है, सारे डिटेल हमारे लोड होके यहाँ पे आ जाएंगे, और ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर हमारा उसे वैलिडेट करेगा, और फिर हमारा ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट यहाँ से रिटर्न बैक हो जाएगा. ठीक है. अभी ये यूजर डिटेल्स जो है ना, ये एक इंटरफेस है, दिस इज ऑल्सो एन इंटरफेस. और मजे की बात है कि इस यूजर डिटेल्स का भी इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लास दिया हुआ है, और वो क्लास काफी इंपॉर्टेंट है. सो लेट मी राइट दैट वन द फाइनल क्लास ऑफ आवर हायरार्की. User details, it is an interface, and this interface is also having a implementation class, and that implementation class name is user. This is the implementation class. ये यूजर क्लास आप चाहो तो इसका इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लास खुद से बना लो और यूजर के सारे डिटेल को आप मेंशन कर दो, और यू कैन जस्ट यूज दिस इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लास यूजर, बना बनाया पहले से जो बना क्लास है. ये क्लास में खासियत ये है ना कि दिस क्लास इज वेरी मच फ्लेक्सिबल, वेरी मच फ्लेक्सिबल. आप चाहो तो इसे अपने हिसाब से मॉडिफाई भी कर सकते हो. इफ यू वांट यू कैन मॉडिफाई दिस क्लास एज वेल. तो चाहे आप किसी भी प्रोवाइडर को यूज करो, दैट मींस एनी सर्विसेज, ईदर इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल्स जो हमने लास्ट एग्जांपल में यूज किया था, चाहे कस्टम यूजर डिटेल, या फिर JDBC यूजर डिटेल, हर केस में हमें यूजर डिटेल्स हमें रिटर्न करना है. वी नीड टू रिटर्न दैट यूजर डिटेल्स. That user details will go back to the authentication provider. So if you notice this last example, here also what we did, we just registered this bean and we have created some user details object. So here is a one user details, which is admin 1234, and that is the authorities. Another user details, and if you notice, ये user details हमने object कैसे बनाया? This is an interface. Let me show this interface to you. So this is an interface user details, which is extending the serializable, and it is having these methods like collection of granted authorities, get password, get username, is account non-expired, is account non-locked, is credential non-expired, is enabled. These many methods are there. And if you notice this user class, ये इसका एक implementation class है. ये implementation class कुछ इस तरीके से दिया गया है कि इसे आप चाहो तो अपने हिसाब से कस्टमाइज भी कर सकते हो, जैसे अभी हमने यहाँ पे किया है विथ यूजर नेम, एक नए यूजर को हमने ऐड कर दिया है. नाउ इफ यू नोटिस दिस class here user, so see here this user class, it is a implementation of user details, default implementation. आप चाहो तो इसका implementation आप खुद से लिख लो, you can write that its implementation with your own. उस केस में आपको ये सारे मेथड ओवरराइड करने पड़ेंगे, लेकिन इसकी जरूरत नहीं है, हमारे पास एक ये बना बनाया क्लास ऑलरेडी पड़ा हुआ है. हम दोनों एग्जांपल देखेंगे. दैट मींस वी आर गोइंग टू यूज दिस क्लास as well as we are going to override this user details interface as well. And that object will have all the details. So we have created this object of user details, and these user details I am passing to where? In this user detail service here. This is in memory user detail manager, और इस manager के अंदर हमने दोनों object को pass कर दिया है. So this is the one approach, and to verify the use password, basically we need to use this password encoder, because adding that plain text password in our Spring Security basically don't allow. Spring Security कहता है कि आपको एक ना एक password encoder use करना पड़ेगा. इसी से हम आपके password को हम hash करेंगे या फिर इस password को हम match करेंगे. तो हम चाहते हैं कि अभी हम चूंकि हैशिंग हम नहीं यूज कर रहे हैं, so I just use that the one basic implementation of this password encoder, no ops password encoder. It is the deprecated, not recommended to use, but since it is a simple application, I have just demonstrated that. We never write that password or enclose this password in this plain text. It's a security vulnerability. तो ये एक अप्रोच है हमारे पास मल्टीपल यूजर को रजिस्टर करने का. दूसरा हमारे पास एक और अप्रोच है जो हमने यहाँ कमेंट कर दिया था, दैट इज हियर. तो यहाँ पे भी हमने इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल्स मैनेजर को रिटर्न किया है, दैट इज द बीन हियर. And in this case, I have just used a different approach. We have encode, then while login, we have to use encoded password. Yes, we'll see that, because just in a second, we are going to see that those encoding and decoding as well. And authorities also we are going to see here. Authorities by default, here I have added some authorities. By default, I have some added authorities, लेकिन इस authority का हम कुछ use नहीं कर रहे हैं. In today's session, we are going to see that authority. क्योंकि basically होता क्या है कि जब भी कोई यूजर लॉगिन होता है ना, तो उसके कुछ रोल्स होते हैं, कुछ अथॉरिटीज होती है कि वो क्या क्या प्रिविलेजेस को एक्सेस कर पाएगा. उसके बारे में आज डिटेल हम बात करेंगे इन द लास्ट सेक्शन ऑफ टुडे इटसेल्फ. नाउ सो दिस इज अनदर अप्रोच. तो यहाँ पे भी आप ध्यान से देखो, हम यहाँ यूजर डिटेल्स हम बना रखे हैं, हमने 3 यूजर डिटेल्स बना रखा है हमने यहाँ पे 1 2 3. और आप इस वाले एग्जांपल में देखो, यहाँ पे भी हमने यूजर डिटेल्स बना रखे हैं. अप्रोच दोनों में अलग अलग है. हियर वी हैव यूज्ड द password encoder, no ops password encoder explicitly, and here we have used that our default password encoder, which is the no ops password encoder only. ये भी user class inbuilt internal वाले का ही use कर रहा है, and by using that we are setting up properly. अब इसे is asking which one is better approach. For in-memory user details, you can use anyone, but I personally believe this one is a better one, because here you have the option to use the different password encoder. Make sense? Please confirm. Hello. Cool. So this is the basic details whatever we have done yesterday. Now let's move on and see here today's session, that is we are going to discuss and these all the details we have discussed already. Password encoding, decoding, today we will discuss in much more detail. So in memory user details internally store and retrieve the user information which is required for authentication, and implements the user detail service interface, and it is internally uses the hash map. Last class we discussed about that. अब आज का जो example होगा, we are going to discuss the example, that means we are going to register this user not in memory. We are going to use what in database. How to do that, saving that in a database, we will see that in this example. So Spring Security authentication using database authorization. So let's create a fresh application and let's follow all the steps. In this example, we are going to do what? We are going to create this classes. That means पिछले वाले example में हम क्या कर रहे थे कि इस user detail service का हम use करें जो बना बनाया था in memory user detail manager. और आप ये डायग्राम देखो, आप तो इस क्लास का हम बेसिकली हम बात करते हैं जिसको हमने यूज किया था, और यूजर डिटेल्स हमने यूजर क्लास से इंप्लीमेंट कर रखा था. लेकिन अब जो हम यूज करने वाले हैं, वी आर गोइंग टू यूज दिस कस्टम यूजर डिटेल्स. Okay, now I'm going to create a fresh application, and in that application I'm going to follow all the steps. So those people, they are still having some doubt, everything will be clear with this example. Let's move ahead and create one select example. So first step, let's follow our slide itself. Everything is mentioned there properly, so it will be easy for you as well. So create a Spring Boot project by adding the following dependency. क्या क्या चीजें हैं? Spring Web, इससे आपको क्या मिलेगा? Dispatcher सर्वलेट मिल जाएगा, embedded Tomcat server मिल जाएगा, जिससे आप REST API बना लो. Spring Security to implement the security. Data JPA, because here we are going to use the data JPA in order to perform the database related operation. You can use a normal JDBC also. That is, we have to use this class. If you are using that normal JDBC without ORM approach, so in that case, you have this JDBC user details interest class is there. You can utilize this class. By using that, you need to create some table and query by plain JDBC approach. You can follow that. But here we are, since we know the data JPA, so it will be very simple. So here data JPA, or अगर हम data JPA use करें, तो of course हमें मालूम होना चाहिए, we need to use the MySQL driver as well. So let's quickly create that particular project. New Spring Starter project. Spring Security DB app 1. और इसमें हम कुछ डिपेंडेंसीज डालते हैं, जैसे कि लॉन्ग बुक भी हम ऐड कर लेते हैं. सो वी विल बेसिकली विल सेव द टाइम फॉर गिटार सेटर्स. लॉन्ग बुक यू ऑलरेडी नो दैट. डेटा जेपीए, MySQL driver, Spring Security, web, and DevTools. These are last thing. One thing is, okay, MySQL driver is also added. Anything is missing? I'm not using the validation. Validation, if you want, you can apply there. So these are the minimum dependency जो list out किए हुए हैं. वहां से 2 dependency ज्यादा है. DevTool हमने यूज नहीं किया, वहां पर नहीं लिखा हुआ. लॉन्ग बुक में. These are optional. You can understand this. Next and finish. So Spring Boot DB, Spring Security DB app 1. And since we have added the data JPA, so some resources, that means application.properties, database connection बनाने के लिए कुछ property को हमें यहाँ add करना पड़ेगा. So let's try to add that in a step number 2. So step number 2, specify the database configuration inside application.properties. So let me just copy this entire thing. And let me verify these things as well. So the database name is MasaiDB. This is the driver name, password, username. It is AutoDDL update, and so it's given. You know all those things. What are the meaning of that? Okay. So this is the step number 2. Now the next step is what? Here, this is the step number 3. We are going to create a customer entity class inside com.masai.model package. So let's create this class here. I'm creating one package. SRC main Java new package model. और इस पैकेज के अंदर एक क्लास बनाते हैं हम, that is customer, and this class I'm going to use here. It will be an entity class. System, and this class will have certain APIs. So let me just certain variables. Copy this, paste it here. Now, something you know already, but something is new to you. So try to understand here. This ID, we know that each customer will have a unique ID, which is auto-generated. You can use either auto, or you can use the identity or sequence anyone. This is the customer ID. This is the name, and this is the email. Email के ऊपर हमने column annotation लगा रखा है unique true. That means this unique, that email will become it will be applied with unique constraint on the field of corresponding table of customer. Why? Because this email I want that each customer should have the unique email. क्योंकि हम इस email को ही हम user name रखने वाले हैं. And then after this password and address. Now you can see that there is the one JSON property is mentioned over the password. Password, here I applied that access is equal to JSON property dot access dot write only. I guess we have discussed this property about this property in our data JPA, right? Some person saying yes, some person saying no. Please check out there. I have already discussed about that. इस property का मतलब ये होता है, I'm explaining it once again. That means it is JSON property. So this password field basically it will be displayed while you are going to register a customer. जब आप customer को आप request body में data pass करोगे, उस वक्त ये password आपका write only होगा. That means it will be displayed. लेकिन जब आप customer के detail को access करोगे, once you are going to get that customer details, you will be able to see the ID, name, email, and address. You won't be able to see the password in a JSON format. Got it? मतलब रजिस्टर करते वक्त तो आप यहाँ पे वैल्यू आप पुट कर दोगे, लेकिन जब इसे आप लोड करोगे कस्टमर के डिटेल्स को, आपको पासवर्ड दिखाई नहीं देगा, because it is only write only, it is not read only. Cool. So here these things are there, and I need what if you have not added the long book, so you can utilize the getter setter. But here simply I'm going to use what you know that data. It is similar, Sudhanshu, it is similar like JSON ignore. लेकिन JSON ignore करेगा क्या कि आपके रिक्वेस्ट बॉडी से भी इग्नोर कर देगा. जब आप कस्टमर को रजिस्टर करोगे ना, तो उस वक्त ये पासवर्ड को आप JSON के बॉडी से भी इग्नोर कर देगा, और अपलोड करोगे तब भी JSON के बॉडी से इग्नोर हो जाएगा. लेकिन यहाँ पे प्रॉपर्टी एक्सेस JSON प्रॉपर्टी राइट ओनली का मतलब होता है कि राइट करते वक्त ये से कंसीडर करे, लेकिन लोड करते वक्त कंसीडर ना करे. मेक सेंस? दैट मीन्स अगर आप कस्टमर को रजिस्टर करोगे वहां तो आप पासवर्ड दोगे, वो कंसीडर होगी, लेकिन जब कस्टमर को आप रीड करोगे तो ये सारे डिटेल आपके पास आएंगे, लेकिन पासवर्ड विल नॉट कम, इट विल बी इग्नोर्ड. दैट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर प्रॉपर्टी. व्हाई? बिकॉज कोई कस्टमर की डिटेल को प्रोफाइल को लोड करना चाहता है, and same time password is also coming. It is also a type of security vulnerability, because password should be hashed, it should never be loaded into your system. Make sense? So this class is done and my entity class is ready. Data annotation is applied, that means getter setter is there. This is the step number 3. अब step number 4 आप guess कर सकते हो क्या होगा. step number 4 फटाफट बताओ आप मुझे. Anyone? Let me check. Repository. Very good, Ritik. So we need to create what? Repository of this entity. So I'm going to create one interface inside one package com dot masai dot repository, और इसके अंदर हम लिखते हैं यहाँ पे कस्टमर repository. And you know that how to create this repository. It should extend what? JPA repository, which will take customer and integer. Cool. We can write it as it is. Now, see here in your notes also, I guess it is mentioned there. The step number 4, create an interface customer repository against the above customer class. So here it is an interface. हमने इस इंटरफेस के अंदर एक मेथड लिख रखा है. इस मेथड का काम क्या है? We are going to discuss in a moment. Let me first discuss about this method. So basically, I have not used JP keyword. आप मेथड को ध्यान से देखो. I have just used the convention. हमने बात किया था जब डेटा जीपी के बारे में हम पढ़ रहे थे. We have some type of convention find by. If you are using that find by, then you need not write the JP keyword. लेकिन आप चाहो तो JP keyword वाला मेथड भी लिख सकते हो. And find by email. Find by email, it is a non-key, non-ID field. Email non-ID field है, क्योंकि कस्टमर का जो ID field है वो कस्टमर ID है. लेकिन since it is a unique I have applied, that means the return type I took here customer. You can take the either customer. आप चाहो तो इसे customer भी रख सकते हो, right? Or if you want to use the functional programming, you can wrap that in an optional as well. So what I have done, I didn't use the list of customer. अगर ये यूनिक की नहीं होता तब हम लिस्ट ऑफ कस्टमर रख सकते थे, लेकिन हमने चूंकि यहाँ पे यूनिक लगा रखा है, इसका मतलब यहाँ पे हम इसे ऑप्शनल में सिंगल ऑब्जेक्ट ही आएगा हमारे पास. We can take that in optional. We have wrapped this in an optional object, but it's perfectly fine. You can use without optional also. You can take that normal customer class also, but you need to deal with the null value that means in a raw form. But if you have this optional, so you can deal with the null value using method object oriented approach. You have the functional programming benefit as well. I hope everyone is comfortable with this method. Please confirm. Cool. बेसिकली इस मेथड का काम क्या है कि ईमेल के अकॉर्डिंग आपको कस्टमर का निकाल के हमें देगा, राइट? Now, what is the next step? Next step is what? Create an implementation of user detail service interface of the Spring framework. अब जो अगला स्टेप है वो थोड़ा सा you need to understand this. अब तक हम क्या यूज करते आए हैं? ये जो यूजर डिटेल्स सर्विस है जिससे आपका ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर टॉक करने वाला है यूजर के डिटेल्स को एक्सेस करने के लिए, तो इसका ये एक इंटरफेस है। हम इसके एक प्री डिफाइंड इम्प्लीमेंटेशन का हमने यूज किया था, लेकिन अब हमें क्या करना है? वी नीड टू यूज आवर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, दैट इज कस्टम यूजर डिटेल सर्विस। इस इंटरफेस का अपना इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, so that's what we are going to write here. So let's quickly do that one. So here I am creating that. I'm going to the first one package, creating one service package. And inside this, I'm creating one class. And that class name, you can give anything technically, but I'm giving here the class name is customer user detail service. It is not in memory user detail service, जो हम पिछले एग्जांपल में यूज कर रहे थे। ये हमारा कस्टमर का यूजर डिटेल सर्विस क्लास होगा, और ये क्लास किस इंटरफेस को इंप्लीमेंट करेगा? इट शुड इंप्लीमेंट यूजर डिटेल्स सर्विस, यूजर डिटेल सर्विस। बिकॉज पिछली बार हम यूजर डिटेल सर्विस का एक प्रीडिफाइंड इंप्लीमेंटेशन हम यूज कर रहे थे, इस इंटरफेस का प्रीडिफाइंड इंप्लीमेंटेशन। इस बार हम अपना कस्टम इंप्लीमेंटेशन हम यूज करने वाले हैं। ओके, इस यूजर डिटेल सर्विस के अंदर एक मेथड है हमारे पास। द मेथड नेम इज व्हाट? हियर इफ आई जस्ट पुट द कर्सर एंड इफ आई जस्ट ओवरराइड दिस मेथड, add unimplemented method. So the method name is, if you just watch this method name, load user by username. Here is a username, and then if it is not there, suppose, so it will throw the user not found exception. And अगर वो यूजर नेम है, so उस यूजर नेम से हमें रिटर्न क्या करना है? हमें बनाना है यूजर के डिटेल्स को। यूजर के डिटेल्स को इन द सेंस कि यूजर की सारी इंफॉर्मेशन उसको इनकैप्सुलेट करना है इस यूजर डिटेल्स में। एंड अगेन दिस यूजर डिटेल्स आल्सो इज एन इंटरफेस। मतलब अगर इंटरफेस एक रिटर्न टाइप है तो आप क्या रिटर्न कर सकते हो? इधर नल और कोई इसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, कोई इसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, राइट? हमारे पास इसका एक इम्प्लीमेंटेशन पहले से बड़ा हुआ है, एक हमारे पास पहले से पड़ा हुआ है, उसका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन का नाम अभी हमने देखा था यूजर क्लास, राइट? अब इस यूजर क्लास को, दिस इज अ वेरी मच फ्लेक्सिबल क्लास, हम इसका यूटिलाइज करेंगे और इस क्लास के ऑब्जेक्ट को हम रिटर्न कर देंगे यहाँ से। लेकिन उसके पहले हमें क्या करना होगा? डेटाबेस से यूजर डिटेल्स को लोड करना पड़ेगा। सो व्हाट आई हैव डन, लेट मी जस्ट गो विद दिस नोट्स। एंड फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल व्हाट आई डिड, आई जस्ट auto wired this customer repository in this one. First of all, since this is a service class, I need to apply this service annotation, and I need to use this customer repository auto wired. क्यों? क्योंकि यही रिपोजिटरी हमें डेटाबेस से डेटा को निकाल के देगी इस यूजर नेम की बदौलत, राइट? तो इसलिए हमने इस रिपोजिटरी को ऑटो वायर कर रखा है, एंड इट्स राइट सम लॉजिक over here. Now let me just copy this code from here, and then let me paste this, and we will explain about this one. Cool. So ध्यान से देखना, इस मेथड में हम बेसिकली कर क्या रहे हैं? ये एक सर्विस क्लास है जिसमें हमने यूजर डिटेल सर्विस का, ये हमारा खुद का इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है। हम इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल्स को यूज नहीं कर रहे हैं, हम अपना इम्प्लीमेंटेशन लिख रहे हैं यूजर डिटेल्स। मतलब अब जो ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर आपके इस डायग्राम से है, वो अब बात करेगा किससे? हमारे यूजर डिटेल्स से। दैट मींस कस्टम यूजर डिटेल्स। इट विल कॉल आवर मेथड लोड यूजर बाय यूजर। ओके, सो इस यूजर नेम को एक्सेस करने के लिए हमने कस्टमर रिपोजिटरी को ऑटो वायर कर रखा है। वी हैव डन दैट। नाउ दिस मेथड वी हैव टू ओवरराइड। सो व्हाट आई हैव डन इन दिस वन, first of all, from the repository, I'm just utilizing this method. That is this one, find by email. So I will pass the email, I will get the customer details. So what I have done here, I'm calling find by email and passing this username. Username is your email address only. I want that the username should be the email address. It will return the optional of customer. If the customer is present, I will do the further operation. Else, I will simply return one exception. Throw one exception, bad credential, user details not found with this username. Till this point, everyone is comfortable? Please confirm. Cool. Now, अगर user detail मिल गया हमें, तब हम यहाँ पे क्या कर रहे हैं? Listen carefully. Very simple. पहले तो इस ऑप्शनल से अपने कस्टमर को हमने एक्सेस कर लिया, राइट? इस यूजर नेम से हमारा पूरा कस्टमर मिल गया. अब क्या कर रहे हैं हम यहाँ पे? तीन चीजें हम यहाँ पे, हम एक ऑब्जेक्ट हमें बनाना है. इसका बिकॉज इसका रिटर्न टाइप आप देखो यूजर डिटेल्स है, मतलब यूजर डिटेल्स इंटरफेस है और रिटर्न टाइप है, मतलब इंप्लीमेंटेशन वी कैन रिटर्न द यूजर क्लास ऑब्जेक्ट, राइट? यूजर क्लास इज प्री डिफाइंड ऑब्जेक्ट. या तो इस इंटरफेस का हम खुद से एक इंप्लीमेंटेशन लिखें और उसे रिटर्न करें. आप चाहो तो इसका इंप्लीमेंटेशन आप खुद से भी लिख सकते हो, क्योंकि ये इंटरफेस है. आप इसका इंप्लीमेंटेशन खुद से लिखो और उसके ऑब्जेक्ट को रिटर्न कर दो. दैट इज कस्टम इंप्लीमेंटेशन. या फिर एक बना बनाया इंप्लीमेंटेशन है, आप इसे कस्टमाइजेबल है ये, तो आप इसे कस्टमाइज करके इसका यूज करते हैं. द फर्स्ट एग्जांपल आई एम शो यू टू जस्ट यूज द प्रीडिफाइंड ऑब्जेक्ट as predefined class, and second example I will show you to customize this user detail interface. दोनों तरीके से हम देख लेंगे तो हमारा सारा कंफ्यूजन दूर हो जाएगा. ओके, तो हम यहाँ पे क्या कर रहे हैं? हम यहाँ पे रिटर्न कर रहे हैं यूजर ऑब्जेक्ट. आप ध्यान से देखो, यहाँ पे हमने एक ऑब्जेक्ट बनाया यूजर, न्यू यूजर. अब ये जब आप यूजर ऑब्जेक्ट बनाओगे ना, यूजर का ऑब्जेक्ट, क्योंकि यूजर डिटेल्स रिटर्न टाइप है, तो इसका या तो आप रिटर्न करो नल या फिर रिटर्न करो यूजर का ऑब्जेक्ट, राइट? इधर यू कैन रिटर्न नल or you can return new user object. अब ये new user object जब हम पास कर रहे हैं ना, new user, let's see that here in this object, in this constructor, this is a very flexible constructor. user here, right? तो एक तो कंस्ट्रक्टर है, यहाँ पे देखो कितने सारे पैरामीटर है. यहाँ पे आपको यूजर नेम, पासवर्ड, यहाँ पे ऑथेंटिकेशन ट्रू है या नहीं, अकाउंट नॉट एक्सपायर्ड, क्रेडेंशियल इज एक्सपायर्ड, ऑल दोस डिटेल्स वी नीड टू स्पेसिफाई. और एक और साथ साथ हमारे पास एक और कंस्ट्रक्टर है इसका ऑब्जेक्ट बनाने के लिए. लेट मी रिमूव दिस, एंड हियर इट इज टेकिंग ओनली 3 पैरामीटर. दिस वन, इफ यू नोटिस दिस वन, so it is taking 3 parameter: username, password, and collection of your authorities. What are the authorities? We'll come back just after this example. So username क्या होगा इस कस्टमर के अंदर? यूजरनेम क्या है इसका? कस्टमर डॉट गेट ईमेल. कस्टमर की यही यूजर नेम है. कस्टमर का पासवर्ड क्या होगा यहाँ पे? कस्टमर डॉट गेट पासवर्ड. एंड दिस इज द लिस्ट ऑफ अथॉरिटीज. ये लिस्ट ऑफ अथॉरिटीज है क्या? लिस्ट ऑफ अथॉरिटीज मतलब आप जब यूजर का ऑब्जेक्ट बनाओ ना, तो आपको अथॉरिटीज भी पास करनी पड़ेगी. लेकिन अभी हम अथॉरिटी के बारे में हमें नहीं पता कुछ. सो बाय डिफॉल्ट अथॉरिटी के बारे में हम थोड़ी देर बाद बात करेंगे. दिस इज वन ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी. हम अथॉरिटी को इस इंटरफेस से रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी के नाम से. दिस इज ऑल्सो एन इंटरफेस. All the authorities, by using that you can access, you have the privilege of accessing a particular resource, will be represented using this interface, granted authority. और इसका एक implementation class भी है, simple granted authority. तो अगर कस्टमर के पास कुछ रोल्स रहते हैं हमारे पास, फॉर एग्जांपल, तब हम क्या करते हैं? हम एक तो हमने यहाँ पे एक लिस्ट बना रखी है अथॉरिटीज की, लिस्ट ऑफ ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी. अथॉरिटीज इज इक्वल टू न्यू एरे लिस्ट. राइट नाउ इट इज एन एम्प्टी अथॉरिटीज. अभी एक भी अथॉरिटी नहीं है कस्टमर के पास. Till now we don't know about the authority. That's why I just put that in an empty list. This is the empty array list, and the same empty array list I have supplied over here. लेकिन अगर इन केस कस्टमर के पास कुछ उसका रोल भी रहता, ये कस्टमर एडमिन है या ये कस्टमर हमारा नॉर्मल यूजर है या फिर मैनेजर है या क्लर्क है, किस तरह का रोल है इसके पास, तब हम कस्टमर से उसका हम गेट रोल भी एक्सेस कर लेते हैं और इसके अंदर, इस अथॉरिटीज के अंदर हम ऐड कर देते हैं इस इंटरफेस का implementation object, that is simple granted authority, by passing the customer dot get role. Don't confuse about this line, just I have kept that in a comment, but as soon as we are going to discuss about the granted authority, we are going to understand this statement as well. मतलब जब भी आप यूजर ऑब्जेक्ट को रिटर्न करोगे, इसके अंदर तीन चीजें पास करनी पड़ेगी आपको, यूजर नेम, पासवर्ड और अथॉरिटीज। अभी हमारे पास कुछ भी अथॉरिटीज नहीं है, तो हमने एक एम्प्टी लिस्ट बना रखा है ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटीज की, एंड दैट अथॉरिटी आई हैव सप्लाइड इट। डज इट मेक सेंस? प्लीज कंफर्म। Cool. So this implementation is done. Now our authentication provider will going to use this our customer user detail service object instead of in-memory user detail service. Okay. अगला step क्या है? Let's move on that. So in this example, we have used the default implementation of user details, जो कि user class है. But if you want, we can define our own implementation of user detail interface having our own configuration and uncomment the last commented line of the error code. ये एग्जांपल थोड़ी देर बाद हम देखेंगे कि हम चाहें तो इस यूजर क्लास को ना यूज करके हम अपना इंप्लीमेंटेशन लिख सकते हैं। कैसे? Let's first run this example, then after we will see that how it will work. Okay, for the time being, just ignore this statement. Okay, this example and this example also we should ignore. We are going to see that after this example is working. Let's move to the step number 6. Step number 6 is saying what? Here. Define the services and the implementation which we want to expose as a REST API. Okay. Vikas, you want to ask something? Please confirm. Cool. So again, I'm repeating here this example. We will come back once again. एक बार ये हमारा default user हमारा काम कर जाए, default user, फिर जाके हम इस user का ना use करके हम अपना custom implementation लिखेंगे इस user details का, and which is here I have written already. That example we are going to see. It will be super simple, but first let's complete it step by step. Now we need to define the services कि क्या क्या services हमें expose करनी है REST API में. ये तो हमारी authentication की चीजें हो गई, लेकिन अब जो मेन बिजनेस लॉजिक, तो इसके लिए हमने एक इंटरफेस लिखना है. So inside this service package itself, I'm defining one separate our interface, that is customer service, and this customer service will have some methods. What are the methods? The method which I want to expose as a REST API. So these are the methods. कौन सा मेथड है? एक तो कस्टमर को रजिस्टर करने के लिए रजिस्टर कस्टमर. सेकंड, गेट कस्टमर डिटेल्स बाय ईमेल. आप पास करो कस्टमर डिटेल्स एंड इट विल गिव यू द, मतलब कस्टमर की ईमेल को आप पास करो और ये आपकी सारे डिटेल को लोड करके देगा. एंड द थर्ड वन, गेट ऑल कस्टमर डिटेल्स. इफ यू कॉल दिस वन, directly you're going to get the list of all the registered customer. If no one is there, it will throw the customer exception, or if this with this email अगर कोई customer नहीं मिला तभी ये हमें customer exception throw होगा. So this class we need to create. So what to do? With the cursor, create the class customer exception, and it should be inside exception package. In this class, I'm just using extending a runtime exception. Cool. So this is my exception class. Okay. जब आपके पास exception class बन गए, अभी क्या करना है आपको? You need to write its implementation, right? So let's see, this is an interface only. So you need to define the implementation. Let's simply do that inside the service package itself. New, create a class. We need to give service annotation over here. No, it's implementation class we need to provide, not in the that class interface. So it should be customer service IMPL. So customer service IMPL, this should implement customer service and override all these three methods. Cool. In this class, we need to apply @service, so that will be registered with the container. और यहाँ पे हमें auto-var क्या करना होगा? You know better than me. So customer repository. This should be auto-var. And based on this method, you can quickly can do that implementation. If we just copy paste, so it will save our time. So same thing we have done. So let me just copy this, paste it here. Oh, it will be here. So it's very simple. So find by email, I'm just using repository find by email. और अगर मिला तो return कर दो object, नहीं मिला तो exception throw कर दो. That is the implementation. Similarly, let's register customer. So इसका implementation कहाँ पे है? Here it is. Customer repository dot save customer without ID, and it will return that customer which will have. Or list का भी implementation, you know very well. That is, it should be just these lines. So that means you need to call find all method. It will return all the customer. If it is not empty, it will return all the customer, otherwise throw the exception. Cool. So this implementation is done. I hope everyone, there is no any confusion. There is no any string security involved in this implementation. Isn't it? Please confirm. Last thing, not last, but second last. That is define the exception handler. We need to define the exception handler. So this class we have already created runtime exception, and we need to create this my error details. So I'm just creating this my error details to customize the exception in our format. Here it is. My error details, which will have this 3 field, and put that here data, so that we get the data settings. Okay, I hope everyone is comfortable with this class also. Please confirm. और अगला काम क्या है? Global exception handler. And in this one, we need to just apply one annotation called @global. Sorry, one. क्या है इसका? बताइए आप annotation का नाम. Which annotation we need to use? Controller advice. Or you can use that REST controller advice as well. Okay. Now, in which we have some exception handler. So let me just quickly copy paste like this. Cool. So it is having 2 exception handler, one for customer exception handler, which will returning that customized details, and one for any other type of exception handler, which is handling any other than customer exception. I guess I don't need to explain this class also. You know about this class. I hope everyone is comfortable till this point. Please confirm. तो स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी से रिलेटेड क्या क्या चीजें अब तक हमने की है? ये तो सारे हमारे रेस्ट एपीआई की चीजें, बस एक ही चीज किया है, क्या हमने सर्विस पैकेज के अंदर हमने कस्टमर यूजर डिटेल सर्विस नाम का एक क्लास बना रखा है. That class is implementing the user detail service, and by taking the help of repository, it has implemented this method load user by user, and it has returned the implementation of user detail based on that username from the repository, and make use of the predefined class user. Okay. Now the next step, that should be the last step. That means we need to expose some REST API to the user. ये हमारे पास कुछ APIs हैं. So let me just copy this one and paste that in our notepad. तो यहाँ पे टोटल हमें 4 API, 4 नहीं 5 API को expose करना है. First, एक get mapping hello, और ये test API. ये should be, it will be called only by the logged in user. It will be protected. जो user logged in हो जाएगा, जो customer logged in, वही call कर पाएगा. Second, post, which is the customers/customers to register any customer. And आप बताओ ये हमारा प्रोटेक्टेड होगा या नॉन प्रोटेक्टेड? नॉन प्रोटेक्टेड ऑब्वियसली, बिकॉज जब तक यूजर अपने आप को रजिस्टर ना करे वो लॉगिन कैसे करेगा? दैट मींस ही शुड बी एबल टू कॉल दिस नॉन प्रोटेक्टेड एपीआई कस्टमर्स. So anyone should call this API, that is, it should be whitelisted. Now get customers of email, मतलब customers हमें वो details दो जिसका email ये है. So get the any customer details based on their email. It is also a protected API. That means only authenticated people can call this. And in fact, if you call /customers to get all the customer details, it is also protected. Now there is a one extra URI is there, that is sign in. ये sign in URI होगा get method, and to log in this credential, that means to call this endpoint, you need to pass that username and password in the authentication. That means using that, from the postman, if you are trying to call, you need to pass that using authorization header, your username and password. So let's quickly create this one. So I have already created, let me just create that customer controller. Don't worry, I will share this application on that channel as well, on LMS. Customer controller should be com.msi.controller. Okay, Zayed is asking that login should be post. No, actually login should be, if you are taking that login data as a request body, which is not recommended, then it could be, you can take that sign in post. But here just sign in, we are talking, this is the demo API, and it will use that taking the value through the request header. User and password should be used using request header. That's why it is get. Okay, so this is the customer controller. First of all, it should be applied as a controller, one annotation. Cool. And then we need to define those endpoints. So first of all, let me just auto-wire this to this class. अब आप ध्यान से देखो, यहाँ पे दो चीजें हम यहाँ पे ऑटो वायर कर रहे हैं. एक तो कस्टमर सर्विस, आपको पता है कस्टमर सर्विस चूंकि कंट्रोलर है, कंट्रोलर शुड टॉक टू द सर्विस टू जनरेट द एपीआई. बट इफ यू नोटिस दिस वन, पासवर्ड इनकोडर, दिस पासवर्ड इनकोडर इज एन इंटरफेस, और इसकी बीन को भी हम ऑटो वायर कर रहे हैं. अब इसका बीन कहाँ पे है, दैट बीन ऑल्सो वी नीड टू रजिस्टर फर्स्ट, देन ओनली दैट बीन विल बी ऑटो वायर्ड हियर. ये पासवर्ड इनकोडर हम क्यों यूज कर रहे हैं, वेरी सून यू आर गोइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड वंस आई विल जस्ट राइट दैट एपीआई. दिस पासवर्ड इनकोडर बेसिकली आई एम राइटिंग लाइक दैट कि जब भी यूजर क्या करे, अपना पासवर्ड दे, लेट्स से दैट 1234, तो या फिर कुछ भी पासवर्ड, so that password basically you want to store in a database. And in database also we should not store the plain password. Why like this? Because database administrator or anybody can simply write the query on a simple SQL query on a database and he can understand the password. So basically my intention is what कि जो database में password save हो वो भी hashed password save. It should not be saved as what? Your simple text password, plain text password. That's why this password encoder I have auto wired. Okay, but हमें इस password encoder के लिए हमें एक bean भी register करना पड़ेगा. That's what we will see that in the next step. Okay, now these are the APIs. Let me quickly copy this API, and then after we will discuss in a moment. Cool. Now, please concentrate here. Get mapping hello. So test handler, it will simply return the string. Welcome to Spring Security. Anyone any having doubt in this controller, this endpoint? Please confirm. This is the first endpoint, whatever is mentioned in your notes. Here it is. By default, जब तक कोई authenticate नहीं होगा, ये इस API को call नहीं कर पाएगा. It's a normal our API is there. Okay, next one. पोस्ट मैपिंग कस्टमर्स, मतलब यहाँ पे यूजर को कस्टमर एक रजिस्टर करना पड़ेगा. So that means he will pass that customer through the postman request body and that customer object will come over here. अब ये जो कस्टमर ऑब्जेक्ट आएगा यहाँ पे कस्टमर के सारे डिटेल्स होंगे, मतलब उसका आईडी नहीं होगा, बेसिकली आईडी विल बी ऑटो जनरेटेड. कस्टमर का नाम होगा, उसका ईमेल एड्रेस होगा, उसका एड्रेस होगा, देन आफ्टर हिज पासवर्ड विल बी देयर. बाय रजिस्टरिंग ही हैज टू, यूजर विल पास थ्रू द पोस्टमैन रिक्वेस्ट बॉडी, राइट. लेकिन ये पासवर्ड हम सेव करने के पहले हम क्या कर रहे हैं, सी हियर आई एम जस्ट यूजिंग दिस पासवर्ड इनकोडर एंड आई एम कॉलिंग कस्टमर डॉट सेट पासवर्ड, पासवर्ड इनकोडर डॉट इनकोड. इस पासवर्ड इनकोडर से हमने कस्टमर के पासवर्ड को इनकोड कर दिया और फिर से उसे रिप्लेस कर दिया. मतलब अगर कस्टमर ने यहाँ पे ऑब्जेक्ट में 1 2 3 4 पासवर्ड है, तो वो पासवर्ड हमारा इनकोड हो जाएगा बाय यूजिंग दिस पासवर्ड इनकोडर, और पिछले पासवर्ड से ये पासवर्ड रिप्लेस हो जाएगा. अब कस्टमर के ऑब्जेक्ट में जो पासवर्ड होगा वो हैश पासवर्ड है, इनकोडेड पासवर्ड होगा. आई होप एवरीवन इज कंफर्टेबल विद दिस स्टेटमेंट. प्लीज कंफर्म. सो यूजर ने जो पासवर्ड पास करेगा वो प्लेन टेक्स्ट होगा, बट व्हेन द कंट्रोलर विल कम हियर और कंट्रोल विल कम हियर, दैट पासवर्ड विल बी हैश्ड एंड द स्टेट ऑफ द कस्टमर ऑब्जेक्ट विल बी चेंज्ड विद द हैश्ड पासवर्ड. अब आगे का काम काफी सिंपल है, यू नो दैट यू नीड टू कॉल दैट कस्टमर सर्विस, call the register customer, pass the customer, here we get the register customer which will have the ID, and since it is there, I'm just wrapping in the response entity with accepted. It should be not accepted, it should be created like that, and this customer will be registered. It will return that response entity. Anyone having any doubt in this method implementation? Please confirm. Cool. Next one, this one, based on the email, it will load the customer. Here, can we use save also? Actually, we should not call save method. Why? Because save method is a part of your repository. It should be the part of your repository. So controller should talk to the service, or service के अंदर save method use होना चाहिए. Sanjay, got it? Controller should talk to the service. Service should talk to the repository. लेकिन आप चाहो तो यहाँ पे डायरेक्टली रिपोजिटरी को ऑटो वायर करके यहाँ पे आप सेम मेथड भी यूज कर सकते हो, बट दिस इज अ रॉन्ग प्रैक्टिस. ऑलवेज कंट्रोलर शुड नेवर टॉक टू द सर्विस डायरेक्टली, इट शुड रिपोजिटरी डायरेक्टली, इट शुड फर्स्ट टॉक टू द सर्विस लेयर एंड सर्विस लेयर विल टॉक टू द रिपोजिटरी. ओके, सो दिस मेथड is there, we discuss. Now this is the finding the customer based on the email. It's also very simple. So yes, save will be there in the service layer. So it is also using the path variable. I am taking this email और उस email से हमने अपने service method के एक method को call कर लिया है. We get the customer and it is here return that object. Make sense? Please confirm. It should not be accepted. It should be okay. Next one, this method will return all the customer details. All the customer details. So customer service, here all the details. We got the list. Wrap this list in a response entity. Return that. This is also super simple. अब बात करते हैं इस मेथड के बारे में. ये मेथड it is having, you can, there are multiple approach to write this login. Login में आप username password some people used to take as a request body. कुछ लोग क्या करते हैं कि यहाँ पे वो लॉगिन एक बीन बना लेंगे और लॉगिन बीन के अंदर यूजर नेम पासवर्ड लेके इसे पोस्ट मैपिंग यूज करके वो भेज दें. I have seen that lots of Stack Overflow and some other details are also there. But it is not recommended because using request body, we should never exchange our password. It is a security breach. Anybody can spoof your request body because आप जो पासवर्ड भेजोगे वो कोई हैश्ड या इनकोडेड पासवर्ड नहीं होगा जो आप लॉगिन बीन से भेजोगे. And you are sending is a request body. It is not secure data. So the ideal solution will be what? The username password should go as a what? From the request header. जैसे हम जो postman से जो username password भेज रहे थे ना, यहाँ पे authorization header and here that is basic auth and here username and password. Last class we discussed कि जब हम ये username password देते हैं तो ये username password कैसे जाता है हमारा server के पास? By using the authorization header and base 64 encoded version of username and password using basic word. Last class we discussed about that. So I'm saying that कि ये API right now it will be
क्या ऑथेंटिकेटेड एपीआई। अगर हमने सिक्योरिटी लगा रखा है तो इस एपीआई को कॉल करने के लिए आपको यूजर नेम पासवर्ड पास करना पड़ेगा। इनफैक्ट किसी भी एपीआई को कॉल करने के लिए यूजर नेम पासवर्ड कॉल करना पड़ेगा। सो आई एम सेइंग दैट फर्स्ट यू नीड टू कॉल द साइन इन बाय पासिंग द यूजर नेम पासवर्ड। अब अगर वो यूजर नेम पासवर्ड सही रहा यहाँ पे जो हम पास करेंगे, मतलब हमारा लॉगिन सक्सेसफुल हो जाएगा और हमारे पास ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट बन जाएगी। ये मेथड हमारा कॉल हो जाएगा एंड सिंपली आई एम कॉलिंग दिस हियर, दैट इज कस्टमर सर्विस कस्टमर डिटेल्स बाय ईमेल। और इस ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट से हम इसका नाम निकालेंगे जो कि हमारा यूजर नेम होगा एंड बेस्ड ऑन दैट आई एम गेटिंग माय कस्टमर ऑब्जेक्ट। और उस कस्टमर के नेम को हम प्रिंट कर दे रहे हैं लॉग इन सक्सेसफुली। लेट मी रिपीट वंस अगेन। इस ऑब्जेक्ट में ये ऑब्जेक्ट हमारा कब मिलेगा यहाँ पे हमें, जब ये एपीआई कॉल होगी। एम आई करेक्ट? प्लीज कंफर्म। अब ये एपीआई कॉल कब होगी, जब हम यूजर नेम पासवर्ड सही हमने दिया है, ऑथेंटिकेशन हमारा सक्सेसफुल हो गया है। एम आई करेक्ट? ऑथेंटिकेशन सक्सेसफुल हो गया है, मतलब इस ऑथेंटिकेशन के अंदर प्रिंसिपल ऑब्जेक्ट होगा। यस और नो? यस इट विल हैव। तो ये ऑब्जेक्ट हमारा अपने आप यहाँ पे पैरामीटर में पास हो जाएगा। कंट्रोलर विल पास दिस ऑब्जेक्ट, दिस इज द ऑथेंटिकेटेड ऑब्जेक्ट and from this authenticated object I'm taking the name and I'm returning this customer details. You can write that instead of doing this you can use other way as well, that is here you can call authentication dot get principal and you can downcast this principal to the customer, which will be the authenticated object, and you can take that customer like this and you can comment the top. सो ऑथेंटिकेशन से प्रिंसिपल निकाल के हमारे पास कस्टमर मिल गया जो कि लॉगिन कस्टमर है और हमने उसका नाम यहाँ पे स्ट्रिंग के फॉर्म में रिटर्न कर दिया। Zaid is asking, but sign in should happen before login, right? Listen, sign in should happen not actually sign in should happen what before login. लेकिन लॉगिन करते वक्त हमें यूजर नेम पासवर्ड तो देना पड़ेगा ना जायद, वी हैव टू पास द यूजर नेम एंड पासवर्ड। अब अगर आप यूजर नेम पासवर्ड, इसके दो तरीके हैं, यूजर नेम पासवर्ड आप रिक्वेस्ट बॉडी से भेज सकते हो या फिर आप कहां से भेज सकते हो, आप स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी के फ्लो से, जैसे कि आप यहाँ पे यूजर नेम पासवर्ड जो हम यहाँ पे हेडर से भेज रहे हैं। सो आई एम एक्सपेक्टिंग द यूजर नेम पासवर्ड थ्रू द हेडर एंड वंस इट विल गो थ्रू द हेडर एंड आवर स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी अपना सारा काम कर लेगा, ऑथेंटिकेशन सक्सेसफुल हो जाएगा और ये हमारी मेथड कॉल हो जाएगी। यहाँ पे हमारा ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट आया, हमें इस ऑथेंटिकेशन से प्रिंसिपल निकाल के कस्टमर हमने निकाल लिया और उसका नाम हमने यहाँ पे प्रिंट कर दिया। Am I clear? Please confirm. Hello. Cool. So let's see that first we'll run this example and see that whether it's working out properly or not. But last thing is missing. What is the last thing? Can you guess what? Yes. We need to write the configuration कि किस API को हमें whitelist करना है और हमें अपने सारे configuration लिखना है। नहीं, ऑल केसेस में लॉगिन नहीं करना होगा नीतीश। एक केस में आपने साइन इन कर दिया, फिर वो जे सेशन आईडी मेंटेन होती चली जाएगी और उसके बाद अपने सारे एपीआई को आप कॉल कर लीजिए, क्योंकि हमने देखा है ना कि एक बार हमारा कॉल हो जाए तो क्या होगा, वो सारे एपीआई अपने आप कॉल होते चले जाएंगे, राइट? इट विल नॉट आस्क यू अगेन एंड अगेन द यूजर नेम एंड पासवर्ड। Okay. Now, yes, Ritik, you are also correct. We need to do the two things. That is, we need to write this app config, our configuration class, where we need to do some security filter chain configuration, as well as this password encoder also we need to inject as a PO. So let me quickly create this class. Just hold on. After writing this example, we will take a small break. So it should be there in the config package. Separate, I'm creating one class called app config, but it should be there in the form dot config. Good. And here it is. I need to use @ configuration और इसके अंदर सिंपली जस्ट कॉपी पेस्ट। यस जैद, यू आर ऑल्सो करेक्ट। हमें वो साइन इन की भी जरूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि इनडायरेक्टली आप एक भी एपीआई को आप कॉल करते वक्त यूजर नेम पासवर्ड पास कर लोगे। लेकिन ये साइन इन इसलिए दिया हुआ है कि एटलीस्ट एक एंट्री पॉइंट हो हमारे पास साइन इन का, कि साइन इन हो हमें कॉल कर ले, फिर जाकर हम दूसरी एपीआई को कॉल करें, राइट। It will be very very helpful when we are going to use the our JWT example also, कि एक बार जो यूजर साइन इन कर ले तो उसे एक टोकन मिल जाएगा और उस टोकन से वो फर्दर अपने एपीआई को कॉल करता जाएगा। Okay, now let me just paste it here and screen security customizer. Cool. And there is no any exception. Now let's quickly see here what's mentioned there. Now here in this Spring Security chain, authorize request here auth request matcher. Now listen, one important thing. Last class we discussed that हमने सिर्फ यहाँ पे पैरामीटर पास किया था स्लैश कस्टमर्स एंड परमिट ऑल, लेकिन आप अपने कंट्रोलर के अंदर देखो आप, तो यहाँ पे आपके पास ना दो स्लैश कस्टमर्स है, पोस्ट मैपिंग स्लैश कस्टमर एंड हियर आल्सो गेट मैपिंग स्लैश कस्टमर्स। तो इस केस में अगर आप स्लैश कस्टमर दोगे तो आपको कौन सा काम करेगा, इट विल थ्रो एन एम्बिग्यूटी एक्सेप्शन। सो यू नीड टू एक्सप्लिसिटली टेल कि हमें कौन सा मेथड हमारा हम उसे व्हाइट लिस्ट करना है। So that's what here I have mentioned that in the app config, it is http method dot post and slash customer. तो ये API सिर्फ पोस्ट के लिए एप्लीकेबल होगी जो परमिट वाले हैं, not for the get. Make sense? Please confirm. So in order to make use, अगर हमने इसे हटा दिया अगर फिर भी ये कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं होगा, यहाँ पे there will be no any exception or no error, it will work. लेकिन this time it will give an exception कि आपके ये जो है ना बेसिकली इट विल नॉट एबल टू, ये आपकी दोनों आपका गेट पोस्ट दोनों व्हाइट लिस्ट हो जाएगा। इट विल बी बेसिकली गेट एंड पोस्ट दोनों हमारा व्हाइट लिस्ट हो जाएगा, बिकॉज आई हैव नॉट एक्सप्लिसिटली मेंशन व्हाट which HTTP method you are using. So in order to tell the explicitly, here you need to tell that HTTP method which is post. It will not throw an exception. Both will be the whitelisted, even get and post also. Make sense? Apart from that, any request will be authenticated. That means whether you're signing, whether you are getting a customer details, whether you are getting all customer details, everything will be authenticated. You know the rest of the thing. This CSRF should be disabled because post method you are going to allow this form login, HTTP basic and HTTP mail. This thing is there, password encoder. ये हमने क्यों यहाँ पे enable किया है? And guess what here? Here in this case, I am not using what? No-ops password encoder. Why? Because here this is the real password encoder which is recommended to use, bcrypt password encoder. Bcrypt is a one type of hashing technique. Using that your password will be hashed, it will be not encoded, not encrypted, right? So there's a one class, implementation class of this password encoder is there, bcrypt password encoder. और इस class के अंदर हमारे पास इस, first of all let me show you this interface having some methods like this encode method, इसको हम अभी हमने use किया है. There is a matches method where you'll pass the raw password and encoded password. It will going to match and return the Boolean value. In next example, we are going to make use of this method. And there is one upgrade encoding. If you want to do some upgradation in your encoding, then you can utilize this method. और इस interface को आपको implement करने की जरूरत नहीं है. There are a number of classes are there, and most recommended class to use that is your bcrypt password encoding. तो ये क्लास हमारा कहाँ पे ऑटो वायर हो जाएगा? इट विल बी ऑटो वायर्ड ओवर हियर. एंड आवर स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी, दैट मींस our authentication provider also uses this password encoder to match your password against your database. Does it make sense? Please confirm. With this, our application is done. Now we are going to take a small break. Those they are running this application along with me, I think you should using controller. You are using controller, not the rest of controller. Let me check in the controller. Here it is. Yeah. Thank you, Shudanshu. It should be the REST control. Gaurav is asking, sign in will be whitelisted URI, right? No, sign in will not be whitelisted. Think logically ना, अगर हमने sign in को whitelist कर दिया, फिर तो आपको यूजर नेम पासवर्ड पास करने की जरूरत ही नहीं। अगर आप यूजर नेम पासवर्ड नहीं पास करोगे, तो ये ऑथेंटिकेशन आपका ऑब्जेक्ट बनेगा ही नहीं. You are going to get an exception. Make sense? That's why it is not whitelisted. You have to pass the username password through the authorization header. And using that, your authentication will be successful and your authentication object will be available here. And from that, we can get the principal, we can get our customer, we wrap that customer name is logging successfully. Cool. So here is the time of a small break. After the break, we are going to run this example. So it is 10:17. We'll come back by 10:25. 10:25, that means it will be the 7 to 8 minute break. Is it okay? We'll come back by 10:25, this short, small break, and then we will run the application. Okay, so I hope my voice is clear now. Cool. So almost everything is done. Now I need to run my application and see the output. So first of all, let me open my MySQL. And I'm going to clean up my database. So drop database, MasaiDB. Create database, MasaiDB. Cool. Since I have used the auto DDL approach, so automatically my customer entity should be created. Let's run the example and see the output. Remember, if you are using the logging framework, you should put the log messages as well, where you are creating that authentication object, or where you are loading the username and password and all those stuff. So my tables is being created, and I guess it is already created. My server is also starting. Let me show that my database. So MasaiDB or tables. Select star from. Cool. So I don't have any record. Let's try to first register one particular customer. So I am opening my postman is 8080 and slash customers. It should be the post request. And I don't need to pass any username and password. So let it be as a default one. And here in the request body, I need to pass this customer detail to whom I want to register. So if we check out that my customer, I could use that Swagger as well, but I'm just using here the customer details. That is, customer ID need not pass name, email, password, and address. Let's quickly do that. Name. So I'm giving any name. Let's say that and here this should be the next one. Email @ram@gmail.com. That should be the password. I'm giving 1234. And next one, I need to give the address.
So these are the details I need to give here, right? ID I need not pass. Let's try to give the request. Let's see that whether it's working. So here, now you can notice that what is the meaning of this one? That is this property, JSON property access right only. So this is the here. If you notice this in a postman, so here the password is visible, but while getting it back, the details, the password is not there because only the right only it is working. Got it? And the customer have the ID one. Let me add another customer as well. So it is Ramesh. And that should be the ramesh@gmail.com. Password, let it be 1234 only. And address I'm making as, let's say that Mumbai. Yes, cool. So now you can see that the password, how it is stored in the database. Now let's check out that, select star from customer. And you will notice this is the one username, the name and the password you can see here. This is 1234, how it is being stored. It is the hashed password. So even though somebody will log your database or fire the query to check out the database detail also, he can't access your password. He can't able to figure out what is your mail password or that means your original password. Because hash password is not reversible. No one can take this string and get back your original password. Make sense? Please confirm. And basically this thing is happening based on the password encoders. This is super secure. Our password is stored. Now let's try to do the sign in. So for that one, I need to use get mapping and I need to call what? Sign in. But can I call this sign in as it is? No, request body is not required. So if I try to call this one as it is, it will be unauthorized 401, right? But in order to call, so what I need to do, authorization, I need to go to the basic auth. Here we can pass any authorized user. So I'm just giving that here ram@gmail.com and 1234. This is the username, this is the password. And now if I fire the request, this time it is having some exception. That is what check on that. Cannot cast to that. Basically, it is not able to cast our from principal. It is not able to figure out what is the details of the customer. So you can notice this is saying that using that model customer is unable. From user details, user is an unnamed model. Basically, the user details will be there. So you just figure it out and modify this. And customer controller. Let me just remove this statement and uncomment this one. यहाँ पे हम कर क्या रहे हैं बेसिकली इस ऑथेंटिकेशन से हम इसका नेम हमने एक्सेस कर लिया टू गेट दैट ईमेल and from the service I am calling this get the customer by the name, and since I got the customer I am just ending this message. That's it. Let's try to do that one once again. And here let's call this API. So Ram logged in successfully. Once it is logged in successfully, now what you can do, you can call any other endpoints. Let's say that this Ram is trying to call all the customer details, customers. That is the get details. And here, these details is working here, right? Why it's not working with the principal? Actually, principal, we need to cast that object in a different format. And then after we need to get back. Actually, principal is also working there. If you want to get those details, you can check out that. I have just mentioned this authentication in the system.out.println log. And you can see this log here. I told that authentication is an interface and this is the implementation object, username, password authentication, and see that here principal object. Principal object is pointing to the user class, not your customer class. That's why it is not able to downcast. So principal के अंदर जो हमारे पास method object है, so that is what basically one user object, and that user is the implementation of user details, which is having all the details of that particular logged in user. That means username is ram@gmail.com, password is protected, enabled, credit not expired, authorities details, credential, authentication, all those details are mentioned there. Granted authority, which is interest. Make sense? Please confirm. Cool. So here I'm able to access all those things, even if I try to call our first test API that is here. Once I logged in, I can call the hello as well. So all the API, I am able to easily access them. Okay. Now, sir, what is the second table in the Masai table? Here, this one. Customer sequence. अरे ये आपका मतलब which is basically used to maintain your customer ID. Auto increment ID is there now. So this customer sequence is maintaining your auto generated ID. You should know about this one in your data JPA or in Hibernate itself. We are learning about this. Sudhanshu. Cool. So I hope everyone got the idea about that, how we can register that and what is the significance. The main important thing is that the significance of this particular method, that means this service class, customer user detail service class, and how this customer is loaded and your authentication is happening. Okay, now here we have used this user detail class, the implementation is user, right? लेकिन हम चाहे तो इस यूजर का यूज ना करके हम अपना खुद का हम यूजर डिटेल्स क्लास लिख सकते हैं. वो कैसे? It is there in your notes as well. Let me just go up, and here is that particular class. If you notice, I've already mentioned there. So in this example, we have used the default implementation of user details, that is user. But if you want, you can define our own user details, which is having more control over our method. So in that case, what we need to do, we need to create customer user details class, not the customer user details service. क्योंकि ये user details interface को हम implement करने वाले हैं, तो ये customer user details interface, the class will be there. So let me stop this. And inside the service itself, I'm creating one class that is customer user details. Class name could be anything, but it should be the implementation of which interface? Implements user details. And override the method. See that how many methods are inside this? Too many methods are there. अभी सारे method का implementation हमें देना है. Okay, लेकिन ये method के details हम कहाँ से pass करेंगे? So इसके लिए हमें क्या करना होगा? Let's see that what I have done. I have applied one trick. I will take a customer object, right? What is that? Customer user detail service. अभी जो ये class हमने बनाया था ना, इसके पहले वाला customer user detail service, इसी class के through ये हमारा authentication हो रहा है. That means basically if you notice this diagram, so authentication will be done by the authentication provider, which is that DAO authentication provider. In the second example, we use in-memory user detail service, जो कि पहले से इसका implementation class है. ये आपके username password को map के अंदर रखता है, right? Not in a database. But right now I want to load my user details from my own storage system by using JWT, by using Hibernate, by using JPA, whatever. In that case, I can't use this one. I have to create my own implementation of user detail service, which I was created just now. That means just before here. तो वो class अभी हमने बना रखा था, that is user details, customer user detail service. Here, customer user detail service, and it is the implementation of user details, right, Nitish? And this interface is having one method load user by username, and I have used this method here. That means I have returned this user details object, which in turn this is the implementation. लेकिन अब जो हम बना रहे हैं, तो हम इस user class को use नहीं करेंगे, बल्कि हम अपने user details class के इसका implementation खुद से लिखेंगे. That's what I'm doing. So what I have to do here in order to implement this method, I need to provide all those details. पिछले वाले केस में क्या था कि सिर्फ हम लोड यूजर बाय यूजर नेम कर दे रहे थे और उस यूजर डिटेल को एक्सेस कर रहे थे, लेकिन इस केस में कुछ ज्यादा ही कंट्रोल हमारे पास है. क्या क्या? जैसे कि इस अकाउंट इज नॉन एक्सपायर्ड, हम यहाँ पे कुछ और लॉजिक लिख सकते हैं. अकाउंट इज नॉन लॉक, a credential is non-expired, this account is enabled or disabled, whatever details we can implement. Now, to implement this class and these methods, I'm using some trick here. What are those? First of all, I'm just taking this one. Let me just copy paste. So I took that customer class as an instance variable. हमने customer class का variable ले रखा है और उसे initialize कहाँ पर कर रखा है, इसके constructor के अंदर, कि जब हम इसका ऑब्जेक्ट बनाएंगे तो हमें कस्टमर का ऑब्जेक्ट पास करेंगे और वो कस्टमर हमारा यहाँ पे असाइन हो जाएगा और इस कस्टमर से हम इस सारे मेथड को हम इंप्लीमेंट कर देंगे. Am I clear? Please confirm. ये कस्टमर ऑब्जेक्ट कहाँ से मिलेगा? इसे इस क्लास का ऑब्जेक्ट बनाते वक्त हमें कस्टमर ऑब्जेक्ट पास करेंगे और उस कस्टमर वो कस्टमर हमारा यहाँ पे असाइन हो जाएगा और उस कस्टमर के हिसाब से ये सारे मेथड हमारे ओवरराइड हो जाएंगे. So let me quickly do that when this changes. So here, here's this. Inside this method. Please concentrate here. Since I don't know about the authorities basically it is called granted authorities. So I just created the empty array list. लेकिन अगर इस कस्टमर के अंदर कुछ अथॉरिटीज भी होती या कुछ रोल्स भी होते तो हम उसके अथॉरिटीज या फिर कस्टमर डॉट गेट रोल्स एक्सेस कर लेते और उनको हम सिंपल ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी में कन्वर्ट कर देते और उसे हम ऐड कर देते. We are going to see that next. That's why I just kept that in a comment. So this is not required. Right now I just created the empty authorities of empty array list and return that authority since it is return type is the granted authority type. Okay, this method got implemented. Password कहाँ पे है user का? So I need to return that here. What? Return customer dot get password. Customer object के अंदर जो password है वो यहाँ से return होगा. User name क्या return होगा? Customer dot get email. Customer dot get email because email is an username. And ये बाकी सारी चीजों को हमें क्या कर देना है? True. बेसिकली बेस्ड ऑन योर लॉजिक और कोई और भी लॉजिक है तो इसके अकॉर्डिंगली आप यहाँ पे ट्रू फॉल्स कर सकते हैं कि कभी आफ्टर 24 आवर और आफ्टर 1 ईयर योर क्रेडेंशियल्स शुड बी एक्सपायर्ड और नॉट और व्हाटएवर यू कैन यूज. अगर 1 साल हो गया तो इट शुड बी रिटर्न फॉल्स, ये हमारा एक्सपायर हो गया. अदरवाइज यू कैन राइट मल्टीपल लॉजिक. ओके, सो दिस इज योर क्लास ऑफ यूजर डिटेल्स. अब आप क्या कर सकते हो कि जो आपने पहले क्लास लिख रखा था दैट इज कस्टमर यूजर डिटेल सर्विस, अब इंस्टेड ऑफ रिटर्निंग दिस ऑब्जेक्ट जो कि पहले से इंप्लीमेंटेशन ऑब्जेक्ट है, can't we return our customer user detail? Let me put that in a comment and uncomment this one. Cannot reverse to convert, then you uses get password. We will talk about that, partners. Just hold on. First of all, please concentrate here. ये जो मेथड है हमारा लोड यूजर बाय यूजर नेम इट इज रिटर्निंग यूजर डिटेल्स. तो पिछले केस में हम यहाँ पे उसका एक प्रीडिफाइंड इंप्लीमेंटेशन क्लास रिटर्न कर रहे थे जो कि कस्टमाइजेबल है. हम यहाँ पे एक कस्टमर का यूजर नेम, उसके पासवर्ड और उसके अथॉरिटीज को पास कर रहे थे और हम इसका ऑब्जेक्ट बना रहे थे. इस केस में क्या है, हम ये यूजर क्लास यूज नहीं कर रहे हैं बल्कि हमने खुद का एक इंप्लीमेंटेशन लिखा है यूजर डिटेल्स का और उसके कंस्ट्रक्टर में हमने कंस्ट्रक्टर को ऑब्जेक्ट में कस्टमर को पास कर दिया है. कौन सा कस्टमर? जब वो लोड होगा बाय यूजर नेम, दिस कस्टमर विल बी पास्ड हियर and this customer will be assigned to here and based on that these all method got implemented. Does it make sense? अब आप ये मुझे बताओ कि दोनों में feasible कौन सा है, कौन सा तरीका feasible है, पहला वाला या दूसरा वाला? Of course the first one. Of course the first one. Why? Because जो आप यहाँ पे काम कर रहे हो ना, ये सारी चीजों को ट्रू करना और ये सारे लॉजिक को लिखना, ये ऑलरेडी इंप्लीमेंटेड है आपका यूजर क्लास के अंदर. ये ऑलरेडी तो आप किसी ब्लॉग में देखोगे कि वो यूजर डिटेल्स को खुद से इंप्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं, कहीं कहीं बस यूजर क्लास का ही वो यूज कर ले रहे हैं, इसके कंस्ट्रक्टर में अपने ईमेल यूजर नेम पासवर्ड को पास करना. सो यू शुड बी कंफर्टेबल इन बोथ अप्रोच. एम आई क्लियर? Yes, of course the second approach is having more control. लेकिन अगर उसकी नॉर्मल एप्लीकेशन में जरूरत ना पड़े so you can utilize this user class, predefined user class itself. Is it okay?
still your application will work, there will be no problem. Okay, somebody has asked that कि सर आपने कहा था कि पासवर्ड हैश चाहिए, रिवर्स नहीं हो सकता है, फिर आप गेट पासवर्ड क्यों लेते हो? अब आप मुझे ये बात बताओ, ये क्लास जो है आपका कस्टमर यूजर डिटेल सर्विस, इसे यूज कौन कर रहा है? Which class is using this class, utilizing this class to get the user details and verify the authentication and do the real authentication? ये किसकी जिम्मेवारी है? This class will be utilized by which particular class to get the user details and do the proper authentication? Let me ask this question once again. Which particular class in a Spring Security will take usage of this class to get the user details and perform the actual authentication? Matches the password, whether the correct user का password और इसका password सही है या नहीं, preparing the authentication object, having the principal object, ये किसका काम है? Authentication provider, DAO authentication provider का काम है. If you just watch this diagram, DAO authentication provider, this is the authentication provider here. Previously, it is the person which is going to talk about the user details service to take the user details. तो पहले हम इन मेमोरी यूजर डिटेल्स से हम यूजर डिटेल्स को हम एक्सेस दे रहे थे, लेकिन इस बार हमने कस्टम यूजर डिटेल्स, दैट इज कस्टमर यूजर डिटेल्स हमने यूज किया और वहां से हम यूजर डिटेल्स को पास करते हैं. Am I clear? So authentication provider will going to talk to this particular class, take the user details, and based on the username, password, whatever coming from the user matches that password, and then only it will compose the authentication object and forward that authentication object to the authentication manager. Am I clear? Cool. So that's what this application is working here. How exactly? Now the entire details about this example is mentioned over here. Entire details about this example. Now let's see that here the next thing. That is what if I want to use the Swagger. Let's try to add the Swagger also and have some fun with the Swagger. तो Swagger हम जब ऐड करेंगे ना, तो उसके लिए हमारे पास कुछ और भी चीजें हमें ऐड करनी पड़ेगी. That means we need to first permit this particular Swagger related routes. Then only we are allowed to access the Swagger UI. Am I clear? Please confirm. So let me just use this request matcher, copy this, and here the app config. Before any request authenticated, I just use this one. That's it. So request matcher swagger dash UI star slash star star. This is for UI related documentation and this is for JSON related documentation. It is purely optional, second one. But it should have is the permit all, just like that. This is the permit all, it is also permit all. Now, next thing what you need to do, guess what? You need to add Swagger related dependency. So two Swagger related dependency you need to add there in your pom.xml. And what are those dependency? Basically, you need to add MVC, Open API, MVC UI, and some other details also you need to access. Let me just check out there. Lambda Swagger related nodes. And I have already explained in the Swagger class itself. That means the last class in where we have used the Swagger last week before curriculum break. After Lombok and Swagger. So these two dependency we need to throw. That is OpenAPI starter web MVC UI. You can search in a Maven repository and one starter validation. Let me quickly copy this both dependency and paste it in our pom.xml. I need to remove this version, not required, otherwise it will be mismatch. But this version is okay.
ये स्प्रिंग बूट का जो वर्जन ऑलरेडी यहाँ पे मेंशन किया हुआ है, इसलिए हमने ये वर्जन हमारा अलग अलग हो जाता है 3.1.0. So this Swagger related dependencies got added, but it is not enough. What we need to do, one more configuration we need to do. So it is mentioned that if you are applying Spring Boot or Spring Security JWT, then this annotation you need to take and assign on a main class. Like this. So this is that your Open API definition, information, security related things, server related details, realm. Basically, this security realm is not required right now. Bearer token related stuff, and this security requirement is also not required because you are not using JWT. You are using the basic authentication. So this is only one requirement is enough. But let it be both work. So our next time when we use the JWT, it will not stop us. So let's save this one and try to run this application once again and try to access using JWT. Sorry, Swagger. So let's run this example. So my application got started. Now I should be able to access using what? Localhost, Swagger, UI.html. And here is our Swagger in the details. First of all, in order to do the login, what I need to do. So there is multiple options are there. In order to call any endpoints, first of all, you need to you have to authorize. That means you need to pass the username and password. So there will be multiple options to get authorized. You need to click on this authorize button. If you don't give this annotation, whatever I have mentioned in the main class, the annotation agar aapne nahi diya, so you won't get this button. So you need to click on this button. And there are two sections. This is for JWT token. Till now, we don't know about the JWT, so leave it. But here you can see that your username and password. So I'm going to authenticate using ram@gmail.com, password 1234. And you need to call that authorize. So it is done. You need to close this. And now you will be able to call any endpoint. आपका authentication हो चुका है. If you just call the sign in, and you need to just use here what try it out, execute, it will be successfully executed. That is RAM logged in successfully. If you try to call get customers, so it will return all the customer details, try it out, execute. Here is your both customer details. Does it make sense? Please confirm. Cool. So this is how to use the Swagger using Spring Security as well. And now let's talk about this Spring Security context holder. स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी कॉन्टेक्स्ट के बारे में हम बात कर चुके थे कि ये जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट हमारा है, दिस इज अ पार्ट ऑफ हियर. दैट मींस ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर को एक बार जब ऑथेंटिकेटेड ऑब्जेक्ट मिल जाता है, तब ये करता क्या है, उस ऑथेंटिकेटेड ऑब्जेक्ट को सिक्योरिटी कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर रख देता है, राइट? And that object will have the principal object. That means if any further request will come, it will check that, hey, in the security context, that object is there. So it won't ask the username password once again, and user will be able to access the resources. So it is the most fundamental object, Spring Security Context Holder. तो एक ही हमारे पास एक class है Security Context Holder. इसके अंदर ही हमारे पास we have some methods are there using which you can get that security context. And you have to set your authentication as well. How to do that, how to work with this one, we are going to discuss about this in our just now one other example when we use the authentication provider. Okay, so security context holder is having the security context, और उस security context के अंदर आपका authentication object encapsulate रहता है, जिसके अंदर आपके principal, that is the logged in user, credential और उसकी authorities सारी हमारी encapsulated होती है. So you have to, if you want to get the Spring security context, you should be able to access here. First, you need to access security context holder.
then only you will be able to access the security context. So इसका काम क्या है? You will see just in a moment. Okay, now last diagram here, please focus on that. Authentication manager is having the authenticate method. It will talk to the authentication providers, different authentication providers. और ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर में भी हमने बात की थी कि ऑथेंटिकेट मेथड होता है, साथ साथ एक और मेथड होता है सपोर्ट. सो ये ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर, अभी हम कौन सा ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर यूज कर रहे हैं? गिव मी योर आंसर. व्हिच ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर वी आर यूजिंग राइट नाउ? हाँ, डिफॉल्ट ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर इज द डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर, नॉट द कस्टम वन. डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर वी आर यूजिंग. So DAO authentication, we can have multiple authentication provider. It's totally depend upon authentication manager की कौन सा authentication provider को ये support कर रहा है. And then based on that, suppose DAO authentication provider is there, and DAO authentication provider will talk to the user detail service, जहाँ पे load user by user name है. और इस केस में हमने अपना custom class लिख रखा है अभी, जो कि data JPA से बात करेगा and it will talk to the data. Okay. So DAO authentication provider is authentication provider implementation that uses a user detail service and password encoded to authenticate the username and password. लेकिन अब हम बात करते हैं कि हम इस user detail service का यूज नहीं करेंगे. In fact, we are not going to use the DAO authentication provider. We are going to use our custom authentication provider. That means we are going to use authentication manager. We're gonna talk to the authentication provider. Authentication provider is the only person which will having that exact authentication logic कि यूजर नेम पासवर्ड बराबर है नहीं, पासवर्ड मैचेस है नहीं, यूजर नेम हमारा काम कर रहा है. यूजर डिटेल्स को एक्सेस करने के लिए ही नीड टू टॉक टू द यूजर डिटेल सर्विस. लेकिन क्या हो कि अगर हम ये डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर की जगह हम खुद का अपना ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर लिखें, कस्टम ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर लिखें, बिकॉज इट इज एन ऑल्सो एन इंटरफेस. तो ये हम कब करते हैं अपना ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर लिखना? जब हमें कुछ स्पेसिफिक हमारे पास रिक्वायरमेंट हो कि हमें कि ऑथेंटिकेट करते वक्त हम ये चेक करना चाहें कि यूजर शुड बिलोंग्स टू अ पर्टिकुलर सिटी, यूजर एज शुड बी मोर देन 18, some other custom requirements if you have. So in that case, we can write our custom authentication logic by implementing the authentication provider, our own authentication provider. अब आप मुझे एक बात बताओ, अगर हम अपना ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर लिखें तो क्या हमें इस यूजर डिटेल सर्विस की जरूरत पड़ेगी? यस, बिकॉज डिफॉल्ट वाला भी यूज कर रहा है, हम चाहे तो अपना वाला भी यहाँ पे हम यूज कर सकते हैं, यूजर डिटेल सर्विस, और अपने हम यूजर डिटेल्स को वैल्यू को हम अकॉर्डिंगली हम यूटिलाइज कर सकते हैं. इट्स टोटली डिपेंड अपॉन आवर विश, हम कैसे यूज करना चाहते हैं अपना ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर. हाउ वी कैन डू दैट? लेट मी जस्ट हैव सम एग्जांपल. ये एग्जैक्टली जो फ्लो हम अपने बात की थी अभी, वही फ्लो के बारे में लिखा हुआ है. यू कैन गो थ्रू दिस. Implementing the authentication provider. Please watch it carefully. Till now, we are using the default authentication provider given by Spring Security, which is DAO authentication provider. Whenever we are using default authentication provider, as a developer, our responsibility is to only load the user details from the storage system like database, configure the password encoder. That's it. And then we forward these changes to the DAO authentication provider. Then the authentication provider will take care of authenticating the user by comparing the password, and along with the password comparison, it also check other parameters like whether account is logged or not logged, disabled or expired, whether the password is expired or not. Everything कौन check करता है? DAO authentication provider. So this DAO authentication provider provide most of the scenario that we want to consider during the authentication of the end user. And the default logic inside it is more than enough for our most of the project. मतलब most of the cases हम DAO authentication provider ही use करते हैं और इसी तरह से login करते हैं. लेकिन कभी कभी in some situation in real time we may have some complex requirement, like to allow only users in the system whose age is more than 18, or allow the user to log in from the list of allowed countries, etc. इस केस में हम अपना ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर खुद से लिख सकते हैं. सो व्हेनेवर वी वांट टू परफॉर्म सम of our custom authentication logic, then we have to write our own authentication provider. अब there can be multiple authentication provider. Like that scenario we have the कहाँ पे multiple authentication provider होता है. For example, if you want to use the multi-factor authentication,
नाम सुना होगा आप लोगों ने, मल्टी फैक्टर ऑथेंटिकेशन, कि क्लाइंट में भी अलाउ टू यूज गेट द अलाउ द यूजर टू गेट ऑथेंटिकेटेड बाय वेरियस अप्रोच। पहले आप यूजर नेम पासवर्ड पास करो, फिर आपको क्या करना होगा, आपके पास ओटीपी आएगा, देन ओनली यू विल गेट ऑथेंटिकेटेड। यस और नो? दैट इज कॉल्ड व्हाट? मल्टी फैक्टर ऑथेंटिकेशन, टू फैक्टर और मल्टी फैक्टर ऑथेंटिकेशन। एक बार में नहीं, आपको पहले तो यूजर नेम पासवर्ड पास करना है, फिर आपको क्या करना है, आपके पास एक ओटीपी आएगा, या मेल पे आएगा, फोन पे आएगा, राइट, या फिर गूगल अकाउंट से साइन अप करो आप। सो दैट इज कॉल्ड मल्टी फैक्टर ऑथेंटिकेशन। उस केस में ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर एक से ज्यादा भी हो सकते हैं। ना इट इज द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ आवर प्रोवाइडर मैनेजर, मतलब ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है कि वो चेक करना कि कौन सा ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर को यूज करना है। उस केस में हमारा जो ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर है वो कॉल करता है सपोर्ट मेथड को। ये हमारा सपोर्टेड ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर है। ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर इज एन इंटरफेस। इसके अंदर दो मेथड है, इस मेथड के बारे में हम बात कर चुके हैं। एंड देयर इज अनदर मेथड सपोर्ट, ये बताता है कि ये हमारा ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर सपोर्टेड है। बस इसे ही हमें इंप्लीमेंट करना है, राइट? सो we need to override both the method to implement our custom authentication provider. So in this case, I have written my custom authentication provider, my authentication provider.java. So let me quickly do that. Copy this. This is the extra information. You can just in real time scenario, very rarely we just write our own authentication provider. We just use the DAO authentication provider only. लेकिन कभी कभी जरूरत पड़ने पे, so what I'm going to do in the service class itself, I'm creating one class that is my authentication provider.java, और इसे हम implement करेंगे that is authentication provider. And here we need to override this one. There are two methods are there, we need to override both of them like this. And next thing is that we need to register this class with the component annotation with our, since you can use the service annotation also, but you need to just use that component so that this class will be registered with the Spring container. अब इन दोनों मेथड को आपको इनेबल, दैट मींस यू नीड टू ओवरराइड। ये मेथड कॉल कौन करेगा, कोई बता सकता है? दिस ऑथेंटिकेट मेथड विल बी कॉल्ड बाय whom? In fact, this support method also will be called by whom? इन दोनों मेथड को हमने लिखना है, वी हैव टू ओवरराइड। लेट्स से वी हैव रिटन सो मेनी लॉजिक, लेकिन इस मेथड का यूज कौन करेगा? Who will going to call these methods? These methods will be called by the authentication manager. Correct location, you are absolutely correct. Authentication manager. So if you just watch this diagram, authentication manager will talk to the authentication provider. तो अब तक जो ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर आप यूज कर रहे थे वो डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर यूज कर रहे थे, उसके अंदर ये मेथड ऑलरेडी इंप्लीमेंटेड है, राइट? वो ऑलरेडी इंप्लीमेंटेड है और वो सारे लॉजिक लिखे हुए हैं। बस आपको क्या करना है, यूजर डिटेल्स किसी तरह प्रोवाइड कर देना है। So it will talk to the take the support of user details and do your all the magic. But in this case, you are not using this DAO authentication provider, you are using your custom authentication provider. That's why you need to write this logic yourself. अब ये कम आपका जो, जैसे ये हमारे पास ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर मिल जाएगा, तो क्या ऑथेंटिकेशन मैनेजर इस DAO authentication provider को कॉल करेगा? No, it will going to call our own custom authentication provider. Does it make sense? Please confirm. Cool. So let me just write this logic here. So what I did, first of all, I just auto wired two objects over here. The first one is the customer repository. Customer repository. And the second one is the password encoder. These two objects I have just auto wired. Even we have both the DAO and custom, then it will prefer custom one. Yes, it will going to check the custom one only, and we need to delete this one. We need to delete, not no need not delete. It will basically by default it will check that our one, it will check that in our container is registered, and it will give the priority to our one. Okay, so, and I need to write this logic here. So let me just copy this logic. And paste it inside this method. Now please concentrate in this first method implementation. So what I did here in this authentication object, ये method call हुआ है authentication manager के through. इसके अंदर सिर्फ get name मतलब user name मिल जाएगा आपको, and get credential you will get the password. That means I told that initially जब ये object बनता है तो इसके अंदर username and password रहते हैं, both you are able to access. अब आपको क्या करना है, आपको अपना वाला कस्टमर आपको निकालना है. That means customer repository dot find by email. You are going to call this method. Right. It will return find by email is not returning the customer. It will return what? Actually something wrong is there in your notes as well. I need to modify this one. It should return what? Optional of customer. Like this. And you need not deal with directly with this. You can just choose if opt dot is empty. I'll say that this should not be the customer. अगर ये empty है तो throw the exception, ये user है ही नहीं. लेकिन अगर empty नहीं है तो क्या करना है आपको? You need to get back this customer. So get this customer from opt dot get. Here is your customer. Like this. And from there you need to make use of password encoder. आपको password खुद से match करना पड़ेगा. So password encoder dot matches, and this is your password. That is here you have taken that from the author जो user ने add किया है अभी जो password login करते वक्त उसने दे रखा है, और customer के पास क्या password है. So customer dot get password like this. So this is the way you can write you can match your username and password credentials. And then after you need to create the granted authority. Right now we don't have any authority, so I just created the empty list. This line should be commented out. I don't have any role, so it is the empty list. And here what I did, I just created that return new user name password authentication token. This username password authentication token, ये किसका implementation class है? It is the implementation class of which interface? It is the implementation class of authentication. So here is the return type is authentication. So here we need to pass the username, password, and authorities. Authorities, by using that, this object got composed, and it is representing your success object. This object will be returned back to whom? It will be returned back to the authentication manager. Or since this object is returned back, authentication manager का काम होगा क्या? Yes, कि हमारा authentication success हो गया, and authentication manager will populate the principal object and then put that in a security context. That's it. Now the list method you need to implement. So in order to implement this method, you can take the support of your DAO authentication provider as well. Let me show you कि ये हमारा DAO authentication provider कैसे implement किया हुआ है. This is the DAO authentication provider. You can see here it is also doing the similar kind of stuff. So it is taking the details, and then after it is matching that present password and the user detail password. This user details it is taking from where? From that user details service. And then after here all the logic you can make use of user details and their details as well. And last one, Okay. Now I need to just make use of this method implementation, that is here. Copy this and paste this. This is username password authentication dot class कि ये हमारे username password token class को इसी तरह के class के support. That means it is not using making use of what authorization server, OAuth2 or OTP related authentication. It is using what our normal username password related authentication, and it is assignable from this authentication object. This line I have just copy pasted from the DAO authentication provider class. So you need to use this class to use this method implementation so that this class will support the username password supplied authentication mechanism, not the OTP related, not the OAuth related authentication support. And that's it. Here you can guess what we have not used other details, like what we are not using. If you notice, we are just loading the customer from the repository. That means we are not using of what? So component is there. Now what I'm going to do this time, this class is not at all required. That is these two classes, user details and user details service. This both classes are not at all required because इस क्लासेस की अब दोनों क्लास की हमें जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी. क्यों? बिकॉज दिस टाइम वी आर नॉट यूजिंग दिस क्लासेस एनी मोर. ये दोनों क्लासेस कहाँ पे यूज हो रहे थे? डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर इनका यूज कर रहा था. लेकिन अगर आप इस क्लास का इंप्लीमेंटेशन ध्यान से देखो तो यहाँ पे हमने डायरेक्टली रिपोजिटरी से यूजर नेम को एक्सेस कर लिया है कस्टमर को, और फिर कस्टमर का यूजर नेम पासवर्ड हमने लेके ऑथेंटिकेशन का ऑब्जेक्ट बना लिया है. एम आई क्लियर? प्लीज कंफर्म. So in this case, you don't need this customer user detail service and customer user detail. So what I'm going to do, this class, I'm just putting this in a comment. I'm not removing this anymore. It will be there. मतलब ये class अब register ही नहीं होगा container के साथ. Okay. And in fact, this user details, it is no way, it will no way going to utilize that particular class क्योंकि ये class use ही हो रहा था हमारा user detail service के अंदर. अब ये क्लास रजिस्टर ही नहीं होगा, मतलब इसका ऑब्जेक्ट भी नहीं बनेगा, and our authentication provider will be used. Let's check out that our authentication provider is using or not. So I'm going to keep one log message over here. So just try to run this example once again and check out that this time it is working well. And I'm going to use the postman. So first of all, let me try to do the sign in. And here, this is the username and password I'm passing through this. Let's call this. Cool. It is working properly. Let me check out that in my console. So our authentication provider is used. That means it is no way it is utilizing that our user details service and user detail customer user details. Both classes is not required. So how much simple it is if you are using your own authentication provider. That means you need to just use what? Take that username password. You need to manually compose this authentication object. That means username password authentication token object and return it back to the authentication manager. आपको इसे authentication manager को manually return करना होगा. Am I clear? Please confirm. But what is the drawback of this approach? Can anyone guess? we don't have more control over there, because what is there, we don't have the control about the user details कि उसका पासवर्ड एक्सपायर है या नहीं, या फिर कुछ और भी डिटेल्स जो हमारे पास इस केस में था। आप यहाँ पे देखो जो हम यहाँ पे मेंशन कर रहे थे यूजर डिटेल्स के अंदर, that is his password is expired or not, his email is locked or not, those details won't be available. So you have two choices. Either you can use user detail service and user detail class, or user detail service in which you can make use of your predefined user class also. Okay. Or if you are not interested to write this user detail service or user detail class, you can directly implement your authentication provider. Your authentication provider you can directly implement with your own without using this user details and these other user detail service classes. Am I clear? Please confirm. So which approach we are going to use, or you are going to use in your examples? Writing the authentication manager, or you have to use that your user detail service? I recommend you should go for user detail service. User detail service, don't utilize that your custom authentication provider. Custom authentication provider, don't use, you are going to unnecessarily breaking that normal Spring security flow. Make utilize that, because more logics, more you can say that security labels are there in the DAO authentication provider and user detail service. So make use of as much as possible the framework given classes instead of writing your own classes. Make sense? So this is all about your writing the custom those. Let me just do one modification. I will tell the that is Zakir to just upload this notes as well, because this notes, this class is not written properly. It was just from that another example. I just copy pasted this example. So let me just utilize this my authentication provider. Like this. I've updated this in notes as well, and I will tell Zakir if you are here, so please upload this notes and update that notes from the LMS. Some people are complain about that कि सर आप जो notes पढ़ा रहे हैं यहाँ पे या हम जो देख रहे हैं that note is not there in the LMS. Is it so? Please confirm. Amita is saying yes, it is. Somebody is saying no as well. So Amita, please check out that the latest one because on a construct week that time Zakir might have uploaded the previous notes, but I have done so many modification and uploaded the updated.
Notes are there, but the thing is this today's note is available in previous day lecture because we are lagging behind a little bit. So this notes
Okay.
uploaded for day 12, day 30.
Cool. Cool. So you can take these notes and Zakir just do what update this note as well, because I have done some modification in these notes.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So here this notes is also mentioned there. If we compare the logic of my authentication provider.java and custom user details.java class, inside custom Java class, we just loaded the user details from the database and converted this object by using constructor. And in this one, we have done to test our application, we can delete the custom user detail class because we are not using this DAO authentication provider. I have not deleted since I have simply did what? I just commented it out. So this class is not at all it is using. अगर हमने इसे कमेंट कर दिया मतलब ये क्लास हमारे स्प्रिंग के साथ रजिस्टर ही नहीं होगा and it is not going to be used by the DAO authentication provider. Cool. So this is the way. This time DAO authentication provider is also there and our custom authentication provider is also there. I told you that we can have multiple authentication providers. Like that is this diagram you will notice there. Authentication manager can talk to the multiple authentication provider.
तो इस केस में पहले ये डाउ ऑथेंटिकेशन प्रोवाइडर के पास जाएगा, वहां पे कोई सपोर्ट उसे नहीं मिला, नाउ इट विल गोज टू द our authentication provider. It will take the support and it will be using directly talking with the database by using repository. It is nowhere using this user detail service and talking to the repository. Does it make sense? Cool. So this is about all the authentication. Authentication हम कैसे करते हैं? We have seen that how to utilize the Swagger, how to whitelist the Swagger related things. Right? Ritik, it is beyond our syllabus to implement that OTP related authentication, but that is because of the already we are that means according to our syllabus. Spring security is not this kind of topic, but we can teach you within just 2 or 3 days. But I'm trying my best to make you just as much as possible to get. Lots of things are still there, like OAuth authorization and authentication. Then after LDAP server is also there, OTP authorization, a number of things are there. So it is beyond our syllabus. Just this authentication authorization JWT is more than enough. Make sense? But remember, the concepts are very simple. Similar kind of, that means same diagram you need to remember. And if you want to have some other details, like want to learn about this OTP authentication and OAuth, so I can provide you the notes out of the box in your revision batch. I will provide some notes also to you so that you can get some more clarity. But it is, as for the beginner, it is more than enough. If you have that till that JWT and filters, it's more than enough for you. Yeah, definitely I will provide, Ritik. If you just go to the first, just complete this normal session, then after the revision batch, whatever the notes I have regarding this OAuth 2 and other framework, or like key clock, Okta related notes and LDAP server related, I will provide to you. Don't worry. Okay, the next one, we are going to move on the authorization part. Actually, we don't have the time, but just I'm giving the slight idea. In Mohammed Zayed Siddiqui is asking, in industry, any companies are going to provide us tasks related to the security? Actually, lots of the security related features are already implemented, Spring Security Framework, but you have to do that. You have to do the security related task as well. They may provide you to implement the JWT authentication authorization and writing some configuration as well. Lots of companies are doing that. Some of my friends are there, they're having 7 or 8 years of experience and they're still working on the security, Spring Security. And you don't believe that they are using the Spring Security 3.x on an XML version only in their company they are using and they are maintaining. How much pain it will be to maintain all those stuff compared to the today's version. But anyhow, you get the proper support, proper documentation. You should have the idea कि authentication authorization होता क्या है, JWT token क्या होता है, कैसे काम होता है, ये password encoder का क्या काम है, authentication manager का क्या काम है, authentication provider का क्या काम है. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about this authorization. Authorization के बारे में हम already बात कर चुके थे, थोड़ा बहुत introduction in the first session itself, कि it is basically what to permission for a particular person. That means privileges, which type of resource you are allowed to access. So there is a difference between authentication and authorization. Please go through these notes. Here, identity of this user will be checked, providing the access to the system. But here, authorities will be checked. कि उसकी user की authorities क्या है. Authentication को हम AUTHN से भी हम denote करते हैं. Authorization को Z से denote करते हैं यहाँ पे. So authentication is done before authorization. पहले authentication होगा obviously, बाद में authorization. पहले आप अपनी identity दिखाओ, फिर जाके आप बताओ कि आप क्या कर सकते हो, which type of resource you are allowed or not. And this is the reverse side. It needs usually user's login detail and it needs user privileges or roles. कि user के privileges क्या क्या हैं, क्या क्या चीजें वो access कर सकता है, view account or purchase product, or let's say that add a particular element, delete a particular element. अगर ये fail होता है तो 401, अगर ये fail होता है तो 403 forbidden. It is asking who are you, it is saying that what you want. If a bank customer employee in order to perform action in the application, we need to prove what identity or provide the identity. And once it is logged in, the bank ka customer ho ya employee ho, to our, then based on the role, authorities will be decided what kind of action he can do. I can do. हमारी हम तो ऑथेंटिकेट हो चुके हैं, लेकिन अब हमारी रोल के ऊपर डिपेंड करेगा कि हम क्या क्या चीजें एक्सेस कर सकते हैं. ओके, नाउ ये अथॉरिटीज सेव्ड कैसी होती है, स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी हाउ इट यूज्ड टू मेंटेन दैट. For that one, Spring Security is having one interface called granted authority, and it is having only one method. That means it's the functional interface. To be honest, और इसके अंदर एक ही मेथड है get authority and which return the string. Now this granted authority means what? Basically, what are the authority user have, and it is the return type is string. Now there is a one type of concept called authority and role. Two things are there. दोनों चीजें अलग अलग है, लेकिन स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी दोनों को ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी के फॉर्म में ही मेंटेन करता है, चाहे वो आपकी अथॉरिटी हो या रोल हो. देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन अथॉरिटी एंड रोल. वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस अबाउट दैट. अथॉरिटीज रोल इन्फॉर्मेशन इन स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी इज स्टोर्ड इनसाइड द ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी. इसी ऑब्जेक्ट के फॉर्म में, मतलब इसके इंप्लीमेंटेशन ऑब्जेक्ट के फॉर्म में. इट इज एन इंटरफेस एंड देयर इज ओनली वन मेथड इनसाइड इंटरफेस एंड रिटर्न द नेम ऑफ द अथॉरिटी. सो स्प्रिंग मतलब आपके चाहे अथॉरिटी हो या रोल, क्या दोनों में डिफरेंस होता है? वी आर गोइंग टू सी इन अ मोमेंट. Just 5 to 10 minutes more, the session will be there. Just one idea. Tomorrow directly we are going to see the implementation of, but today also you can try it yourself. That example is mentioned then, but tomorrow anyhow we are going to run this example. So granted authority के फॉर्म में ही आपके रोल अथॉरिटी दोनों को स्प्रिंग सिक्योरिटी मेंटेन करता है. It will use to maintain. Granted authority is an interface and Spring Security has provided one implementation class also. The implementation class name is simple granted authority. Is the default implementation of granted authority. We don't do that our implementation. Let it be the simple granted authority only. Now the difference between authorities and role, there is a one difference, but both stored inside the Spring Security framework is same. दोनों granted authority के फॉर्म में स्टोर होते हैं. जब भी हम granted authority की बात करें, आप समझना ये एक इंटरफेस है, and this is the implementation. Now this authorities information is stored inside the user details and the authentication interface, which play a vital role during authentication of user. मतलब ये जो ऑब्जेक्ट है हमारा ग्रांटेड अथॉरिटी, इसकी इंफॉर्मेशन आपको ऑथेंटिकेशन ऑब्जेक्ट के अंदर भी मिलेगा एंड यूजर डिटेल्स के अंदर भी मिलेगा. ऑथेंटिकेशन का जो इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है वो है, उसका नाम यूजर नेम पासवर्ड ऑथेंटिकेशन टोकन. देयर आल्सो वी हैव द मेथड कॉल्ड गेट अथॉरिटीज, and by using that you'll be able to access all the authorities of collection, list of all that list or set whatever you want of granted authority. और यूजर डिटेल्स के अंदर भी ये मेथड है हमारे पास गेट अथॉरिटीज. by using that also you can get all the authorities of a particular user. Now this method will be utilized by the authentication manager, and by the next time the you have one authentication filter is there. अगली बार जब user logged in होगा, so that user is allowed to access a particular role or not based on this method will be decided. And this method basically used to create the username password authentication token and to assign the privileges. We will see that practical, that example. In order to fetch the authorities for a particular user that we have loaded from the database under the user class, there is a method called get authorities. So user class के अंदर हमारे पास get authorities method है, which will be invoked by the Spring Security framework. And in case of our custom authentication provider implementation, when we create the object of username password authentication token, here also Spring Security framework will invoke the get authorities method. मतलब अगर DAO authentication provider है, that will gonna take use of this user class get authorities method to fetch that all the authorities of a user. लेकिन अगर हम custom implementation करते हैं तो वो authorities हमारी कहाँ से fetch होगी? That is from our authentication object. Spring Security will fetch that particular all the authorities. Okay, if you have noticed, if you have seen there this example, both example, there I have created this authorities object. Let me show you. This is my authentication provider. Here also, I just created this list of granted authorities and passed that this authorities in this object. Right? So our Spring Security will call that, hey, what is your username? What is your password? And what are the authorities of this user?
So this is in case of what our custom authentication provider. But in case of what our DAO authentication provider, if you notice this customer user details, here it is. So it is get authorities, जहाँ पे हमने empty authorities list हमने return की हुई है, क्योंकि अभी हमने कोई authority पे काम हमने किया नहीं, लेकिन क्या होगा अगर user के पास authorities है. So let's quickly have the difference between role and authority, and tomorrow we are going to discuss in much more detail about these authorities. So basically role और authority में क्या difference है? Anyone any idea about this role and authorities? Please confirm. Role and authority. Listen, authorities are the granular things. Granular thing कि आपकी क्या आपकी privileges है. That means suppose that if you are a customer, so you can view the products. You can see the view the let's say that you can get a particular product. Right? It is basically the छोटे छोटे हमारे जो privileges है ना कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं, हम ये काम कर सकते हैं, हम ये काम कर सकते हैं, हम ये काम हम view कर सकते हैं, update कर सकते हैं, हम get कर सकते हैं, we can add one particular product, right? So these are what small authorities, what I have the authorities. These are the granular things. But what is the role? Role is the, you can say, is the basically authorities are, you can say, fine grain thing, but roles are called coarse grain. Coarse grain मतलब ये सब का इकट्ठा जोड़ कि हमारा रोल क्या है. अगर हम एडमिन है तो हमारे लिए कुछ काम है कि एक एक काम को अथॉरिटीज को असाइन करने की बजाय हम एक रोल असाइन करें. अब अगर ये एडमिन है तो अपने आप ये 4-5 अथॉरिटी के लिए एप्लीकेबल है. ये व्यू कर सकता है, एडिट कर सकता है, डिलीट कर सकता है. अगर ये यूजर है तो इसके लिए कुछ चीजें अपने आप यहाँ से हट जाएंगी. तो दोनों में बेहतर कौन होता है कि एक कस्टमर को या एक यूजर को मल्टीपल अथॉरिटीज असाइन करने की बजाय हम एक या दो रोल उसे असाइन करें. इस यूजर का रोल क्या है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आप एक बैंक में जाओ तो बैंक में आप क्या करो, हर एम्प्लॉय को, कि क्लर्क है तो क्लर्क का क्या क्या काम है, उसका काम है पैसे काउंट करना या फिर कस्टमर को हेल्प करना या फिर कुछ और भी फॉर्म भरना या जो भी है, राइट. टीचर इज अ रोल एंड वर्क ऑफ अ टीचर इज अथॉरिटीज. Yes, Ritik, you can say teacher is a role. So teacher, what he can do that. But some other task, you can say that our IAs is having what they are having some other authority like that. They have what they can create a lecture, they can upload the notes, they can share that your feedback link and other things. So they have these different type of authorities. So उनको क्या काम दिया गया है, right? But if you consider the faculty or the teacher or the, you can say that a trainer who is teaching you, so like that he having that particular role. Now what he can do, if he having this role, then automatically some authorities are there under him. Like that he can perform, he can create his own lecture as well, he can share some questions feedback form to you as well, like that. So in a simple term you can say that roles are what, authorities are fine grained, मतलब छोटी छोटी चीजें, छोटी छोटी हमारे privileges है, and roles are coarse grained, इकट्ठा सारे authorities का एक जोड़ है हमारा. Make sense? Some more differences are mentioned there. So roles are basically group of authority. So authorities, you can say that individual privileges or action. If a user is trying to do something in an application, then application will allow authorize them to do only if the user having the granted authorities to do so. Authorities are the fine grained permission of what user can do. Like that individual privileges or action like view customer, update customer, etc. And roles are what, group of authorities. So assigning the same authorities to multiple clerks again and again, it will become tedious. So roles are very much like a group of authorities that the usually assigned together. Roles are more coarse grained permission, like unlike the fine grained permission of authority. Like, and Spring will security will use the roles with role underscore prefixes. So if you have admin role, so security हमारा जो Spring security maintain करता है वो इसे role underscore admin, role underscore user, etc. Roles are also represented using what, the contract granted authority in Spring security as we discussed. And just go through these notes. It's a very simple, you will understand there. Now in this example, I just created or modified this customer class. Tomorrow I will create the fresh example of this application as well. In this one, you will notice I have just used first using authorities. So I created the list of authorities. This authority is an interface. So list of authorities I have used and one-to-many relationship. It is not an interface. Basically, authority हमारे पास class. Authority class, which is having the another entity class, and it is having the auth ID, name, and the customer. And you will see that this example, you can try with your own. Just simply just you apply your common sense and try to execute, copy paste this example and try to execute this example yourself. Tomorrow we are going to discuss much more detail about this example. We are going to apply that which person is having the authority, having any authority, only that person will allow this to call this particular API. The next example I have used using role as well. So रोल बेस्ड ऑथराइजेशन, यहाँ पे हमारे पास अथॉरिटीज नहीं है बल्कि हमारे पास रोल है, राइट? और ये रोल से हम कैसे एक्सेस करते हैं, दैट थिंग आल्सो वी विल गोइंग टू डिस्कस इन टुमारो सेशन. So you will just I recommend everyone to just first do some exercise with the normal authentication provider. Try to implement yourself, try to utilize that user util service, try to utilize the user class, try to understand the basic flow कि हमारा कौन सा मेथड कैसे कॉल होता है, and execute some example. It's a very simple. एक बार ये छोटी छोटी चीजें कनेक्ट हो जाए ना आपकी, तो सारी चीजें काफी क्लियर हो जाएगी. Don't just if you have, don't confuse here. If you have any kind of other doubts are there, we have some 1 day more we are going to take. Not 1 day, tomorrow, maybe day after tomorrow also some part we are going to discuss about this security, because we need to discuss lots of things like filters, course configurations, CSRF token, JWT as well. But these are the very important thing, authentication and authorization, and remaining things are much more simpler. We'll see on tomorrow's session. Thank you everyone for having this to attend the session. So Zakir, let me just pause the session.